You wake before the bell, not because anyone has rung it, but because the house has a way of breathing you learn to match. Light seeps through the leaded panes in a plain grey that flatters nothing and therefore offends no one. Rushes cool your feet. The hearth drowses under a sift of ash, pretending it did not keep you warm all night. You are not fooled, but you allow the pretense. Plain mornings are kind to keepers. They leave room for small work done well. You dress without conversation. Linen kisses your skin with the clean bite of cold water dried yesterday by the hearth. Black wool settles on your shoulders like a rule you agreed to and still find sensible. The veil ties where your fingers always tie it, 2 finger widths from your brow, because a steady face spares you from explanation. You will not barter brightness for approval this morning. The sky has already declined, and you are content to match it. On the peg above the oaken coffer hangs the belt, dark leather, oiled, shaped by years to your waist. From it hangs the small iron ring, and from the ring the keys broad, narrow, one thin as a reed, one older than your patience, and therefore highly trustworthy. They rest against the wood like small birds on a rail. People say they jangle, yours do not. You have spaced them proper, each thong tied so teeth do not gossip. They speak only when work expects an answer. You lift the belt and feel the weight settle into the soft place above your hip. The weight is not burden, it is promise. It says the day will have orderly edges. It says doors will open because you ask them with the correct iron words. It says you are the person who knows what is inside and where it belongs and when enough is enough. This is the kind of authority that makes no speeches and keeps the pudding sweet because the spice stays locked. You kneel to wake the fire. The poker is as blunt and patient as an old friend. Embers stir, a small surprised red among the grey. You add a twist of straw, a handful of thin sticks, one stout log that takes its time deciding to be useful. The first smoke tastes of yesterday and damp. It clears its throat and becomes warm. You could call this skill. You prefer to call it habit. Habit is a skill that has stopped asking to be noticed. You wash at the ewer. Water is river cold, honest, mildly insulted to be indoors. The cloth is rough and forgiving. You press it to face and wrists and let the clean ache settle your thoughts into rows. A mouse in the wainscot conducts its dawn affairs with the secrecy of a trumpet. You grant a pardon. Not every noise asks permission. The keys are quiet against your gown. A small, thoughtful weight that says later, pantry, then linen, then door. You check the belt. The right loop began to stretch yesterday. You open the small workbox with the needle key a sliver with more confidence than metal and draw out wax, thread, and needle. 2 neat stitches and a firm knot. The leather obeys and lies flat. The wax smells faintly of honey and last summer's patience. The ring hangs straight again. There is a little peace in such shallow repairs. When small things sit right, big things forget to be troublesome. You stand and look at the room as if it were new, which is your private harmless habit. Window with sheepish sky. Table with its burnished place where a hand has always rested. Stool that scrapes the same obedient scratch into the floorboard. Nothing majesty loves, everything usefulness applauds. You own this order because you tend it, not because anyone carved your name in stone. Keys do not care for carvings, they care for teeth and timing. You step into the passage, and the keys give one clear note. Not a jingle more, a small bell that knows its job. People claim houses wake with cocks, yours wakes with iron. You pause at the stair to let the world line itself up. Pantry first, then the ale cellar, then linen, then outer bolts drawn for the maid. The list fits inside your breath. Lists are your gentlest prayers. They make no demands beyond themselves. The lower rooms keep a slow dawn. 12 steps down, the 9th a little uneven, the 3rd always remembering to creak. You carry your weight softly. The house carries you more softly still. The willow market basket leans by the table, a veteran of more mornings than it pretends to remember. The pantry door waits in its iron straps, wood cool and well behaved. You lay your palm upon it because you like to be on civil terms with whatever you intend to command. Without looking, you thumb the broad key forward on the ring. Your fingers know it by feel. the bite, the thickness, the little nick from the time someone else tried to turn it wrong. You do not correct the memory, you merely keep the key cleaner now. Why wear them at your waist? So your hand finds them without drama, so no one needs to search your table or your pockets. So the house sees what it requires marching directly with you. There is another reason, quieter and less eager to be admired. Iron at the waist reminds you of steadiness, the way a rosary reminds a thumb of prayer. The weight says, here is the keeping. It keeps you to the keeping as much as it keeps doors to their purpose. It is not armor. It is not a banner. It is simply the measure of what you answer for, where you begin and where you decide the household ends. You have not turned a lock yet. You will. For a breath, you allow the waiting to be its own business. The faint warmth from the hearth sidles down the passage. The smell of flour and cool wood stands on the threshold like a patient guest. You draw the key to the keyhole and feel the tiny conversation of iron on iron. Yes, says the key. Yes, says the lock. The ring settles, the belt holds, your day takes its shape. You turn the key. The veil hangs heavy with the morning damp, its edges tugging faintly at your breath as you tie it close. Widow's weeds, they call them, as if the fabric were a creeping plant that grows over you once grief takes root, black, unyielding, and dull against every possible light. Yet it spares you from anyone expecting cheer you do not care to offer. The cloth does the speaking so you may be silent, and silence is a currency more precious than coin when your household listens too much. You stand in the chamber that feels both too wide and too empty, the air filled with yesterday's ashes and today's chores. The bed remains half-made because you no longer share the burden of smoothing a second hollow. You tug the coverlet, but without fuss, as though even fabric knows it must no longer expect to be admired. The keys at your side press against wool. It is not pain, but a small reminder. Iron is honest about weight. They hang where the girdle crosses your hip, and you imagine them as small companions muttering among themselves. Pantry, they say. Linen, they echo. Coffer, chest, gate. They insist upon their own importance, though they do it with such quiet steadiness that you find no fault in their chatter. You cross to the hearth again, now awake enough to notice the faint soot lines drawn by last winter's smoke, thin streaks that no cloth scrubs away. You leave them. No guest will scold you for such things. The black cloth of your gown pardons you from vanity. What matters is that the locks hold, the keys answer, the cupboards close, and the house obeys a hand that still has work. You pause to listen for footsteps. The house, empty of a husband's tread, seems always surprised by its own stillness. Rooms wait for a master's voice, and receive instead the steady slide of iron against iron. That is your answer to them. Not command, not correction, only the turn of a key that tells them, I am still here. At the small chest by the wall sits the veil box, a wooden piece stained by years of fingers opening and folding and tying black cloth. You have chosen this one because its latch answers only to your smallest key, the one thin as a bird's bone. You turn it now, and the hinge creaks with its mild protest. Inside lies another veil, more threadbare, a relic of earlier grief. You do not remove it. One veil is enough. One silence suffices. The air in your chamber tastes of wood smoke and wool grease. Not sweet, not bitter, merely patient. You breathe it as one breathes vows. Not to love, not to cherish, but to tend, to maintain, to persist. The belt at your waist is the same vow, only made visible. Some neighbours see keys on a widow and think of her loneliness. You know better. They are not a reminder of absence. They are the exact opposite. They are presence made portable. You smooth the wool of your sleeve, tug at a stray thread. It curls away with no drama. The veil dips forward, narrowing the world into the tunnel of what you choose to see. Perhaps that is what the black is, for not to hide you from others, but to hide the world from you. Too many faces, too many doors. Better to close them and keep the ones you can. Downstairs, you imagine the pantry with its cool hush, the ale cellar with its sour promise, the linen press with its lavender dignity. Each will greet you when you arrive, each will consent to be opened only by the iron you carry. That is the quiet bargain. You feed them your keeping. They feed you their obedience. At the coffer by the wall lies the purse. You keep it tied with a leather thong that will not loosen unless coaxed. The coffer itself holds documents and relics that are less useful but more insistent: seals, small notes, a ring wrapped in cloth. That key, the thick one with the square head, digs most at your waist when you bend. You let it. Some weights are not meant to shift. You let your hand rest on the keys one more time before you move. They are cool to the touch, each edge softened by years, but still sharp in its language. You know them without looking, each by its shape, its patience, its stubbornness. They do not flatter you with gold. They are not jewelry, though everyone sees them. They are your weeds, yes, but the useful kind, the kind that roots where you put them and holds the earth in place. You draw your breath, straighten the veil, and step into the day, not with fanfare, but with the click of keys that sound exactly like belonging. The girdle waits folded on the bench, plain leather darkened by years of wear, its surface polished not by vanity but by the endless rubbing of wool skirts. You pick it up and bend it around your waist, its curve already remembering your shape. The tongue slips into the buckle without hesitation. You do not hurry, because there is no prize for speed in the morning, only the steadiness of each step completed in its own order. From a small iron hook beside the coffer hangs the ring. The keys dangle in their familiar order, each strung on its thong, broad teeth first, then the narrow shank for the grain bin, then the notched one for the chest that no servant touches, and finally the thin reed of a key that opens the needle box. You place them on the girdle, adjusting so that one lies between two, never against each other, lest they chatter like restless children. They are companions, not gossips. The sound they make is soft, almost polite, not the bright jingle of a careless hand, but a low clink, like stones underwater, rounded and tired of showing off. This sound will follow you all day, not enough to announce, but enough to confirm. Each door will answer this faint voice, and each latch will remember its place. You think of it as a language between house and keeper. No words, only iron. You check the loop that holds the ring. It has stretched in the past, pulled long by the stubborn weight of your trust in it. You tug it now. Find it firm from yesterday's stitching. It will last until autumn, when leather grows brittle with the chill. That is how things go: wear, repair, wear again. Keys are honest about the work of living. They never promise forever. They promise until mended. Once secured, you test their balance. You walk the width of the chamber, once, twice. The keys swing with you, brushing against the wool of your gown. They rest back into place with no fuss, like hens settling into a roost. You prefer them this way, orderly and resigned, never clattering about as if they owned the place. At the small table stands a jug of ale left from last night. You do not drink yet, but you move it aside to make room for the needle box. Its lid bears a tiny iron clasp, and the clasp waits for the smallest key, the one that always surprises you with its stubbornness despite its size. You turn it, and the hinge size opens. Inside lies a scattering of thongs, waxed thread, and a scrap of linen folded around spare loop. You choose a thong, running your fingers along its length, feeling the waxy drag. It will be needed before the season ends. Keys live longer than thongs, iron outlasting leather, as if to remind you that keepers must be menders, or else lose their authority to rust and neglect. You set it aside for later, because mornings do not forgive distractions. You close the box, turn the key, and slip it back onto the ring. It settles between the others with a small note of satisfaction. You wonder, not for the first time, if keys know jealousy. Perhaps the pantry key envies the chest key for guarding more valuable stores. Or perhaps the ale cellar key gloats because it keeps what men find dearest. You smile a little at the thought and then let it drift away. Keys are not children. They need no comfort beyond oil and cloth. The girdle now feels correct, its weight evenly spread, the buckle secure. You pull the wool of your gown over it, smoothing the fabric until only the faint outline of the ring shows beneath. Everyone knows what hangs there, and everyone knows what it means. A widow with keys is a widow with her own authority. No man stands at her shoulder to unlock or deny. She keeps. She holds. She decides what is opened and what remains shut. You step toward the door of the chamber. It has no lock of its own, because privacy is a luxury you neither need nor trust. Still, you rest your hand on its latch and push it slowly open, listening for the weight of the house shifting in reply. The stair yawns below, narrow and uneven, worn by years of tread. The smell of yesterday's bread lingers faint in the rafters, a reminder that the pantry will be your first conversation of the day. Keys brush your hip as you descend, their faint voice promising the order to come. Behind you, the chamber rests, veil box closed, coffer patient, stool quiet. Ahead lies the round of locks and latches, bolts and bars, each waiting for you to acknowledge them. You step into that waiting with the calm certainty of someone who has already chosen her companions: leather, iron, wool, and silence. The pantry door greets you as though it had been holding its breath all night. Its planks are darkened with age, banded by iron straps that bite into the grain, and at the center, the keyhole waits like a patient mouth. You do not hurry. The key is already between your fingers, broad-shouldered and mild with use. The teeth slide into place, and for a brief moment you hear the lock hum its low agreement. You turn, and the sound, soft, certain, final, marks the true beginning of the day. The air inside meets you with its usual blend: flowers' faint sweetness, dust's dry whisper, and the sour trace of yeast clinging to shelves. Wooden bins line the wall, their lids closing down with the solemnity of monks at prayer. You raise one, and the pale dust of flour rises as if surprised by light. You press 2 fingers into the top, leaving a shallow print, and it feels cool, as if summer's heat could never dare come this far indoors. On the lower shelf sit cloth-wrapped loaves from yesterday, heels hardening but not yet given to waste. You cut one with the blunt knife that always lies in the same place, on the board with its scarred surface. The knife's edge complains more than it works, but it gives you the peace you need. You hold the slice up to the light and note the darker line of the crust, the pale belly of the crumb, the little hollow where an air pocket once dreamed of rising. Near it rests the salt chest, small but stubborn, locked against careless hands. You draw the narrow shank key, slip it in, and turn with the same calm patience. The lid opens, and white grains wink up at you like a minor miracle. Salt does not spoil, but people spoil salt with greed. That is why the lock matters. You pinch a bit, rub it between finger and thumb, and let it scatter back into its place. Beside the salt sits a spice box, humbler than some, but not without its pride. Its lock is finer, a little trickier to coax, but it yields with a sigh. Inside are parcels of pepper and cloves, their sharp scent stronger than their tiny size deserves. You do not take any this morning. Such things are rationed with thought. Still, their presence pleases you, a quiet reminder that even widows' households have a thread of luxury if they mind it carefully. You move slowly through the shelves, not rushing because nothing here rewards haste. Beans in a sack, their pale skins soft against your hand. Dried peas, more brittle, clicking like beads as you stir them. A crock of honey, its rim tacky, the lid fitting only after a polite shove. All of it watched over by the keys at your side, each lock holding a piece of this stillness for you until you choose otherwise. You close the spice box, then the salt chest, then the bin. Each latch clicks back under the turning key, and the sound is as steady as the ticking of a clock you have never seen but can imagine. Order restored, nothing wasted, nothing opened more than it should be. The belt at your waist feels heavier now, though the weight has not changed. Only your sense of its duty has grown fuller with each lock returned to silence. For a moment you lean against the jamb, loaf in hand, watching the room return to shadow. The pantry is never truly empty. Even when the bins grow low, the sense of promise clings like the flour dust that coats your sleeve. This is what the keys mean. Not treasure, not triumph, but the quiet certainty that things will be there when asked for, because you have kept them so. You step out, close the door, and turn the broad key back in its place. The latch clicks, the iron ring settles, and the house seems to sigh in agreement. The first lock of the day has been spoken to and answered. The others wait their turn, as calm as you are, because all of you understand the rhythm. One door at a time, one key at a time, one breath at a time. The bread cupboard comes next, its door lower to the ground, built stoutly of oak that carries the smell of loaves, even when empty. You stoop to it, feeling the keys tilt against your side. The one you need is shorter, with blunt teeth that fit only this cupboard. You find it by touch, your fingers sliding past the narrow shank, past the long square one, to this smaller piece that waits as though it knows what hour it is. The key slips in, and the lock turns with little resistance. Bread must be easy to reach, even when secured. You open the door, and a mild aroma rises, the mingling of flour, yeast and ash, baked into the very wood. Inside sit 2 loaves from yesterday, crusts hardening, middles still soft enough to give under a knife. A smaller half-loaf leans against the wall, set aside for broth, its heel cracked but serviceable. On a shelf above rests the salt chest, no larger than a small box for trinkets, but heavier than appearances suggest. Salt bears weight as if it knows its value. Its key is thin, more delicate, and requires a careful turn. You draw it from the ring, noticing the way the iron is cool, nearly slick from your own handling over the years. You place it into the lock, and it resists for a heartbeat before agreeing. Inside, the salt gleams faintly in the dim light, crystals pale as bone. You run 2 fingers through it, letting grains slide down into the chest again, the sound like dry rain. Beside it sits the spice box, humbler than its reputation, but guarded nonetheless. The lock is a little stiff. The box demands persuasion rather than force. When it opens, scents crowd the air: pepper sharp enough to prickle your nose, cloves sweet and dark, a faint trace of ginger that lingers from the last parcel stored there. These are not for daily use, not for ordinary broth or bread. They are for holy days and guests worth the expense. You close the lid without taking any, the key clicking shut as if agreeing with your restraint. All 3, the bread cupboard, the salt chest, the spice box, represent the rhythm of your keeping. Bread for the body, salt for preservation, spice for those rare moments when life dares to be more than enough. They are 3 voices in the household choir, each answering to its own key, each depending on your belt. You sit back on your heels for a moment, the cool floor pressing through your gown, and breathe in what the cupboards offer. The flour's dust, the salt's dry purity, the spice's whispered luxury, all of it locked again, not because you mistrust the world, but because order lives best when measured by iron teeth. You rise, slip each key back into its place, and feel the ring settle against your hip once more. The cupboard door shuts with a muted thud, the chest lid closes with a soft weight, the spice box latches as if sighing. 3 locks answered, 3 promises renewed. The belt carries their secrets again, patient and unquestioning. As you step away, the faint scratch of mice in the corner reminds you why locks matter. The smallest creatures will always test what is left open. Iron does not argue, it simply refuses. That refusal is your authority. You turn from the cupboards and follow the familiar worn step down into the ale cellar. The air changes at once. It folds around you with a damp coolness, half earth, half yeast, and wholly unconcerned with daylight. Here the stone walls keep their own counsel, sweating a little moisture that darkens the mortar lines. You pause at the threshold because the cellar always asks for respect before you enter, as though the barrels themselves keep watch. The latch sits low, iron dark with years of palms. You choose the thick key with the square head, the one that fits into the bolt with a seriousness none of the others quite carry. It is stiff, never opening without a pause, as if to test whether you have truly earned admittance. You turn, feel the catch slide back, and the door groans as though it resents being disturbed. The smell greets you first, a mingling of damp oak and the faintly sweet tang of fermenting mash. It has been here longer than you have, and it will be here long after, a constant presence like the sound of bells from the parish. Barrels line the wall, hoops darkened, wood swelling against its bonds, each one filled with the quiet labour of time. You step closer, your feet soft on the worn steps, keys whispering against wool. You press a palm against one barrel's side, feeling the cool dampness where the wood drinks from the air. A faint hiss answers back, the sound of ale shifting, alive in its confinement. It is not a voice for others to hear, but you know it. The house depends upon these casks, not only for drink, but for trade, for gifts, for moments when generosity is as necessary as bread. You lift the tap of a smaller barrel, not to pour but to listen. A soft fizz rises, like breath escaping a tired chest. You let it be. No need to test further. The cooper's work holds. The brew continues. Time performs its slow task without interference. You lower the tap and rest your hand on the iron hoop, a small gesture of courtesy to the wood. Shelves line one wall with jugs, some full, some waiting. A few are marked with chalk, initials scrawled to remind you which belongs to which tenant or neighbour. Keys are not needed for jugs, only for doors. Still, you like to see them arranged, each in its place, none left to chance. You turn back to the door, feeling the air press heavier now, thick with the yeast and the damp earth. The latch waits to be drawn back into place. You take the square-headed key again, slide the bolt across, and hear it close with a satisfying finality. As you climb back up, light greets you faintly from the higher room. The cellar retreats behind you, its secrets once more held firm. The keys hang steady, their weight exactly the same, though it feels to you as if you have taken part in a transaction. Your attention for the cellar's obedience. You give a small nod to no one in particular. In this house, iron is always listening. You climb once more into the hall where air feels lighter and warmer. The smell of yeast clings to your gown, but here another scent waits, faint lavender, mingling with the drier, cooler breath of stored cloth. You know it before the door even opens. The linen press always carries that quiet perfume, as if the herbs have sworn to defend fabric against both moth and melancholy. The press stands tall against the wall, a wooden sentinel with panelled doors and heavy hinges. Its key is narrower than the cellar's, longer than the cupboard's, a slim tongue with a subtle curve. You draw it from the ring, its edge smooth from years of rubbing against leather. It slides into the lock with ease, as though linen itself welcomes your approach. The doors creak outward, slow and stately. Inside, neat stacks of folded cloth rise like small hills. Sheets bleached by sun and water, towels with their rough weave, tablecloths stiff from starch. Between each stack you have tucked sachets of lavender, little bundles tied in faded ribbon. Their scent drifts up now, steady and faint, a comfort without demand. You lift a sheet, feeling its weight. The cloth is cool, its fold sharp as a blade's edge. You set it back carefully, because linen is as proud of order as you are. Beside it lies a towel, coarse but honest, woven for work rather than display. All have their place, and none will leave the press without a key first granting permission. The sachets crumble a little when touched, petals dried to dust, yet still holding their voice. You crush one between your fingers, and the fragrance blooms again, sharper for a moment before settling back into the air. It clings faintly to your sleeve, a quiet mark of your visit. You lean into the doorway and breathe. It is not only lavender and linen you inhale, but the sense of keeping. Clean things kept safe, ready when called upon, never left at the mercy of damp or vermin. The keys at your side are proof of that. When you close the doors, the wood accepts your push with a gentle groan. The lock turns, and the long narrow key slides back onto the ring, joining its companions with the small resignation of a job well done. The scent lingers even after the press is sealed, like a benediction escaping through the cracks. The house seems calmer now, bread and salt secured, ale accounted for, linen pressed and perfumed. The rhythm continues, each lock answering in its turn. The belt holds them all, heavy yet strangely reassuring, like a hand resting always at your side. The grain bin waits in the corner, built heavy with broad planks, its lid domed and banded by iron. You lift the ring of keys and find the one for it without looking, the long shank with shallow teeth, smoothed where your thumb always rests. The lock is stubborn, as grain always insists on being guarded. You coax it with patience, and at last it turns, giving way with the slow dignity of a vault. When you raise the lid, the smell of husks and dust escapes, dry and honest. Wheat and barley lie together, heaped in a patient mound. The surface shifts faintly, settling like sand. You reach for the scoop, wooden, worn round by years of use, and let it sink into the grain. Each measure is a small wave, the sound of kernels sliding like pebbles on a shore. You count them into the bowl, 1 scoop, 2, 3, until the measure is right for the day's bread. A wax tablet lies on the shelf, its surface smoothed but never clean of marks. You draw the stylus across it, making the tally that says what you have taken. Simple lines, notched one against the other, as quiet as your thoughts. The wax is cool, faintly greasy, leaving its scent on your fingers when you put the stylus down. You close the bin carefully, smoothing the surface of the grain with the back of the scoop so it looks undisturbed. The lid comes down heavy, sealing the smell and the sound inside once more. You lock it again, the iron key clicking into place with that sound you trust more than any oath. For a moment you pause with your hand on the lid, listening to the silence return. The grain is safe, the tally is made, the day's portion is measured. The house holds steady because the locks do. You hang the key back onto the ring, its place clear among the others, and the belt settles into its rhythm again. The room feels smaller, filled with the quiet weight of what you have just done. There is no triumph in grain counted, but there is reassurance. Each scoop is a promise carried forward, each lock a wall against hunger. That is enough to call the day honest. The big oaken chests wait along the wall like patient cattle, broad-backed and iron-banded. You approach the nearest with the mild ceremony it prefers. Your palm rests on the lid to greet the wood. It is cool, holding a little night in its grain, worn to a shallow shine by years of sensible hands. The hasp is thick and honest, an iron mouth held by a pin that answers to one of your stouter keys. The ring comes forward, and your fingers choose by memory, not the square-headed cellar key, not the long reed of the needle box, but the blunt, dependable one that belongs to chests you do not leave to chance. You guide it home and hear the lock give its low, thoughtful click. Agreement, not drama. The lid lifts in 2 stages. First, the small sigh of hinge against hinge, then the slow rise to the leather strap that keeps it from overreaching. Inside, the air is drier than the room dust, beeswax, and old lavender sachets that remember being strong. The top tray slides forward snugly. In it, spare girdle loops, thongs for keys, a cake of yellow soap grown thin, a bundle of thread, and a folded scrap listing which chest shelters what. Beneath the tray lie folded things that remember feast days better than you do. A wool mantle with its edge neatly whipped, a linen hood pressed flat, gloves that contribute little but enjoy being acknowledged. You turn them once, not to admire, only to keep fibers from sulking into stiffness. Things respond to being noticed. Keys prove this hourly. Garments do the same when seasons move slowly. You check the corners for damp. None. The bottom boards hold steady, iron nails showing the brown bloom of age without threatening to travel. A small linen bag rustles. Inside, coins gathered from rents and not yet walked to the steward. Counting is a separate ceremony with its own table and witness, so you only test the drawstring, find it firm, and lay the bag back to its quiet. You close, turn, and move to the next chest a little lower along the wall, its lid more scarred where a rougher history passed over it. The hasp is newer than the wood, a winter repair from the year a bolt forgot its work. The lock takes a narrower, longer key. Your fingers find it without looking. The turn is lighter, the click quicker, a younger voice agreeing to behave. Inside are household linens too weighty for the press, thick tablecloths for saints' days, napkins with a red border stitched by a girl persuaded that red discourages stains. You allow the superstition, it offends no one. A bundle of spare rushes lies wrapped against damp. Near it, candle ends saved for the day when ends are melted and poured into usefulness again. Beneath the cloth you find the wooden tally staff for borrowed trenchers and returned jugs, its notches marching in pairs. proof that promises. A third chest answers to the smallest, stout, key stubby, and self-important. This one guards small, practical luxuries. A pewter measure with a dignified ding. A simple silver spoon wrapped in linen because silver believes itself fragile. Parchment scraps for notes that must outlast wax. A seal matrix with your mark plain and undecorated, kept in a double-tied pouch. You press the pouch once with a finger. The wax inside is cool and patient, pleased to be reminded but not required. Dust collects where lids meet rims. You run a cloth along the inner edge until the fold stays cleaner. From the workbox you take a wedge of wax and rub a thin line along the hinge pins. The smell is honey caught in smoke. You open and shut the lid twice. The hinge drops to a murmur. Hinges speak. You prefer them discreet. A latch on the fourth chest has begun to stick. You test it, find the tug immoderate, and make the note that will later walk itself into the household book. For now, you rub the iron where it meets its keeper with a scrap of oiled wool. It is slower work than anyone thinks worth praise. All the better. Praise is a poor oil. Patience does more. Each chest requires its own key and its own touch. You give both, moving down the line until rhythm takes over and you are no longer naming which key sits where. Your hand knows, your ear knows. The little clicks and satisfied thuds make a psalm with no words. You close what you opened, return each key to its thong, and settle the ring so it lies flat and does not tug at your gown. The belt takes the weight and says nothing about it. You sit on the bench for a breath and let the house be exactly itself, wood, iron, wool, the dry breath of stored things. In such company you remember why keys ride at the waist, to keep the conversation between keeper and kept easy to begin. A door should be answered the way you answer your name, without hunting. You rise and test each hasp once more, not distrusting your work, only enjoying the sound. The final click is neat and decisive. You lay your palm on the last lid, give it the lightest push, and it refuses to move, well satisfied with itself. So are you. Locks are not meant to love you. They respect you, which is better and quieter. You loop the ring under the belt's tongue to steady it for walking. The room smells faintly of wax now, and the lavender memory has climbed out of the first chest and onto your sleeve. You brush the dust from your hands and let the keys rest where they always rest. The chests keep their peace, and you keep yours, each bound by iron that is humble and effective. There is comfort in wood that answers you and stays put. You take it without apology. The day's work continues. The house remains held. You step away, and every chest remains itself, not because you stared fiercely, but because you turned the correct small teeth at the correct small times. This is a kind of prayer, said in locks and lids, and the quiet satisfaction of things that stay where they should. You leave the wall of chests behind, and listen to your belt as you walk a mild, companionable note. Another door waits, and another after that. You will open them in order, and you will close them again. The house appreciates consistency, so do you. You stand at the cross passage where stone meets timber, and the last of sleep slips out of the beams. Morning asks what you will open. The back door minds the yard, the side door minds the lane. Bolts want hands, locks want teeth. You begin with the back door. The upper bolt slides, iron rasping lightly from its socket. The lower bar follows, wood polished by years of boots that mistook hurry for purpose. You do not hurry. The door eases inward, and the yard's air steps in cool, damp, smelling of earth and straw. You lift the latch once to be sure it will listen later, and cross to the side door. Its long bolt rides in an iron shoe, dragging like a reluctant thought, then yielding with a single decent thunk. The latch answers, the hinges oblige. A soft knock arrives with that breath. You have trained the maid to knock softly. Mornings do not benefit from enthusiasm. You open only wide enough to set the day's tone. Her cheeks are bright from the air, her eyes set for work. She dips. You step aside. The house will tell her what to do if the doors are in their proper moods. From the yard comes the quick clatter of the boy, water pattering the rim of his bucket as though the well would call it back. He tugs his forelock, which always springs up again, and presents the handle like a standard. It is water, which is treasure enough. You nod in a way that thanks while also reminding that standards exist. He will fetch kindling, knock mud from his shoes on the threshold stone, and remember that the ale cellar is not for curiosity. Keys do that speaking. You place them in the rhythm with 2 fingers and a glance. The maid to the rushes in the hall gather, sweep, lay new then to the hearth to set kindling like letters that spell heat. The boy to the lean-to for wood, then back to the pump for a second bucket. You keep to the doors, pantry firm, linen press at peace, counting corner private, buttery hatch shut to idle hands. Doors explain divisions more cleanly than lectures. Even so, you lay a thin coat of words over habit so habit shines. This stays fast, you say at the pantry, turning the key to the first resistance and back again so the maid hears the lock assent. This opens for sweeping only. You add at the buttery, sliding the shutter an inch. You show her the peg and how it sits when content. Content pegs do not wander. You point toward the scullery and the yard gate beyond. Stand them when steam needs air. Shut them together when weather turns. She nods. The boy opens and closes the scullery door with the pleased patience of someone learning that hinges can be taught good behavior. You allow yourself a small smile. Iron accepts modest praise. Boys thrive on it. At the stair, you draw the bolt that guards the steps to the solar. No one needs to go up yet. The bolt answers with the crisp tone of a troublesome child finally willing to sit. Keys hang quiet against your gown, reminding you that discretion also wears iron. Near the side door, the maid hesitates, broom in hand. The lane? Her eyebrows ask. You spare her the neighbour's opinions. Later, you say, as if later were a place. For now, the hall and the bench by the door. She curtsies and begins. The boy returns with a second bucket. The handle squeals its complaint. You show him the leather strip that silences it and tie it. He brightens, as if entrusted with a secret. Quiet is a tool. You make a short round of thresholds. Yard door open. Lane door set ajar and affable, yet unwilling to gossip. Buttery shuttered. Pantry firm. Cellar bolted. Counting corner closed. No key needed. Because sometimes the keeper's body is the better lock. The house begins to sound like itself. Broom keeping time. Water settling into basins. Kindling taking flame. Poker answering the great once. The maid glances at your belt. You let the sight stand. The lesson lives in iron. Responsibility travels with its owner, not hanging where any quick hand might borrow it. She understands. You have taught her with open doors and closed ones, with simple no's and quiet yeses. The boy learns because you place his hand on the scullery latch and tell him, only this one. Before the day settles, you show them the manner of an open door that is, in spirit, closed. You set the side door wide to throw a blade of light across the flags, then angle the settle bench a finger's breadth so any passer must turn a shoulder. Open for air, you say, closed for business. The maid smiles. The boy tries the gap, finds his shoulders will fit and his pride will not, and returns to wood and water a little taller. There is no need to speak of thieves. Locks say those things calmly in iron syllables. You prefer to speak of tidiness and timing. The house breathes according to what your hands decide. This is not power that struts. It is stewardship that keeps bread honest and spoons accounted for. If anyone calls it dull, you will not argue. Dull is the polish that keeps hunger from cleverness. You pause again at the cross passage. The maid's broom keeps time you could set a psalm to. The boy has learned that buckets should not sing. The hearth sends a willing heat to your wrists and draws the damp from wool. You lift the ring to resettle it. The keys touch each other once, a courteous nod among colleagues. A cart rattles past the lane. The sliver of sky in the doorway tries to be blue, and succeeds enough to be forgiven. You take stock of what is drawn and what is set. You will visit them again before noon, and again at dusk, and again when the house decides it is done. Doors enjoy attention almost as much as they enjoy certainty. You draw the side door nearly shut, leave it on the catch, so spring air will not feel slighted, and turn back into the hall. The morning is properly begun, dignified by the unremarkable ceremony of bars lifted and set, latches tried, and two young pairs of hands pointed toward useful labor. Your belt is heavier by nothing and steadier by everything that depends on it. The house approves in its quiet way. You approve it back. You move on. You set your hand on the willow basket by the bench, its rim polished by years of being lifted for errands that never make a song of themselves. The weave creaks once, a dry, comfortable sound. At the bottom lies yesterday's cloth, a square of stout linen, clean enough to greet bread and greens without complaint. The basket is light now. On the coffer sits your purse, a plain leather bag with a drawstring that behaves only when shown how. You pull the thong through your fingers, smooth the twist, and tie the market knot you trust. Easy to loosen for counting, tight enough that no breeze or hand invites itself inside. The leather smells of tallow and thyme. It is not pretty. It is ready. You open the purse and check its small republic. Pennies and halfpennies, a few groats with more self-respect than their size earns, and one larger coin put aside for the baker who likes proper change. You do not jangle them. You shift them with two fingers, the way you move embers when you want heat but not smoke. Counting is not suspicion. It is politeness toward the day. Beside the purse lies the small coffer key, shorter than most, with a squared head and teeth that never pretend to fit anywhere else. It opens the chest where rents and notes sleep, and where sealed papers lie that the steward pretends not to want to read. You weigh it in your palm. It does not ride the ring with the household keys. You keep it separate for mornings when you may need to open, count, and close again while people around you talk about onions as if they were news. You slip the coffer key into the hidden pocket sewn inside your belt, a winter evening invention of 3 running stitches and 1 back stitch for stubbornness. The pocket sits where your hand falls naturally. No searching, no display. A widow carries enough to be seen without volunteering the rest. The familiar ring stays at your side, pantry, press, chest, cellar quiet on their thongs. The market will see them because the market sees belts. Let it. Iron is its own statement. Before you lift the basket, you open the household book. It lies where it should, tied with faded cord. Yesterday sits there without drama. 2 loaves, a small onion, a twist of wool, a needle for the boy's shirt, no spice. Today you mark the margin with the blunt quill. Salt fish if the cellar looks awake, early cabbages if they smell of field rather than cellar, and oat groats for the maid's pot. A question mark for soap, because soap can wait for better prices. The maid watches your hand. You lift the quill so she sees how a halfpenny earns a notch and a penny its own short stroke. Write what you intend, you tell her, and then what you did. She nods as if she had already thought of it, which is the right way for lessons to settle. You set the book aside and take the basket. The lane door is cracked for air, polite but not generous. You slip through, your gown brushing the bench, the keys touching wool in one small companionable note. Outside, the lane smells of damp stone and someone else's breakfast. You draw the door near shut behind you so the house will not feel abandoned. The basket rests against your hip, a second belt that carries vegetables instead of promises. The purse tucks under the linen square. Through the cloth you feel the oval press of coins when you steady the rim with your palm. Their weight is modest. Modesty buys better than boasting. The coffer key lies warm at your waist. You walk without hurry. Markets reward ears more than mouths. The cobbles offer a serviceable path. They remember too many wheels to be proud. You nod to a neighbour with her own basket and her own noisy keys, the plain courtesy of women who keep houses that eat and sleep. At the gate, you pause. Some mornings the sellers come to the yard. Some mornings the yard is enough. Today the clouds behave, and the air keeps its promise to be neither sharp nor soggy. You decide the stalls will serve. You lift the strap a little higher so your shoulder carries its share and the belt is not asked to do all the work. Keys shift once and settle, persuaded. You test the purse's knot a final time. 2 loops, 1 tuck, the end turned back under nothing to admire, everything to rely on. You tuck stray hair beneath your veil, not because anyone will notice, but because you prefer the feeling of things in place. The habit of keys has crept into your hands and refuses to leave them idle. Before you go farther, you make small arrangements at the edge of home. The boy keeps to the yard and the woodpile. The maid keeps to hall, scullery, and hearth, none of which open without your keys, and all of which open without trouble. You set the settle near the lane door at the angle that makes strangers hesitate, and friends step around without thinking. Furniture can be polite on your behalf. You step out fully. The basket rides easy, the purse sits quiet, the coffer key rests where it belongs. As you go, you recite the silent inventory that follows you like breath. Bread enough for 2 days, ale content in the dark, linen breathing lavender, chests pleased with themselves, bolts civil, latches obliging. Lists are the low songs of keepers. A voice floats from the square, offering prices to anyone with ears for theatre. You allow a thin smile. Prices perform, purses decide. Your keys do not approve of theatre. Neither do you. You will buy what sense agrees with and come home with as much noise as you left with. The square waits, a place that is mostly corners. The basket's rim taps your hip in a quiet rhythm. Iron nudges wool and stays polite. The purse does not argue. The coffer key keeps its counsel. A widow's household moves with her, and because you carry the means to open and to refuse, you move without hurry. You go to market like that, not to be seen, but to see, not to bargain loudly, but to decide quietly, with iron at your side and a basket ready to make good on whatever choice you nod at. Morning does not complain, neither do you. You take the folded note from the household book and slide it beneath the linen in your basket, where it will travel better than under any official seal. The guild steward prefers paper that smells of bread rather than wax. It reminds him that dues and rents become loaves when they behave. Your keys brush your gown as you step into the lane, a measured sound that tells the stones you are not wandering but proceeding. The square holds its usual theatre fishwives praising scales, a pot mender praising patience, a boy praising himself for not dropping a bundle he will drop later. You keep to the margin where the church's shadow falls like an instruction. The basket handles bite your palm just enough to remind you not to buy too much noise. The purse rests under cloth, coins settled into a truce with one another. Your belt carries the true audience, iron companions who have no interest in spectacle and no fear of it either. The guild hall shows itself the way a sensible man shows himself: timber, plaster, and no apology its doorway, carved only enough to admit a dignity that has work to do. Inside, the floor remembers every boot that ever thought itself important. Benches keep their lines. A long board waits with ink, sand, and a tally that believes in counting more than in speeches. You stand at the threshold until the clerk bothers to look up. You do not clear your throat. Doors and men both open better when they think it was their idea. From mistress? He catches himself and uses your name, which you allow him to think he recalled. You set the folded note on the board. He breaks the seal with the small, agreeable noise of wax giving up. His lips move over the words nod back. You already know what they say. Wheat rent tallied, 2 groats owing to the cobbler's widow, and a reminder that St. Crispin's Day requires candles that do not sputter. He signs a line where no one will ever admire it, and pushes a small token your way, a square of wood marked with the hall's stamp. For the chandler, he says. You take it and tuck it beneath the cloth with the purse, as if it were another coin that has not yet decided what it wants to be. He eyes your belt the way men eye weather. Keys make them thoughtful, which is worth more than flattery. You return the favour by being brief. There is a chest against the far wall, iron-bound and self-satisfied. It belongs to the hall, not the parish, but chests know one another like cousins who pretend not to. You look at its 3 locks, each with its own pride, and consider how much ceremony it takes to open anything that thinks itself valuable. You are not impressed, you are simply prepared. You thank the clerk with the smallest bow that will not be mistaken for a shrug, and leave him to his ink. The street between hall and church is short enough to be honest about it. You cross to the porch where stone balances the day's noises into something like obedience. Candles smoulder near the image of a saint who has perfected the art of listening to complaints without promising to do anything rash about them. You approve. Calm is the only cure you can afford. The parish clerk appears with his own ring of keys, which jangles like a conversation he forgot to keep private. He smiles in the direction of your veil rather than your face. "If you please," he says, which is the correct phrase for any request to a person who can lock you out of the pantry of heaven. You do not correct him. You follow him along the nave where dusty light falls in stripes and the flagstones remember knees better than feet. The arm's chest sits under a carved angel who has learned to look indifferent about generosity. Its wood is dark, as if it had soaked up a century of coins and found them only moderately interesting. 3 locks front the lid, one for the parson, one for the churchwarden, one for the brethren of the guild. Today the parson is away. The chest will not open. This pleases you. Chests should resist whim. Charity is not a box to be prized up by anyone with a reason and a story. Still, the clerk asks to see the key you keep for the guild's part, not to turn it, only to satisfy himself that iron continues to exist where it ought. You slip the thong free and place the key in his open palm. It is slimmer than your household keys, more decorous, with a cut that behaves as though theology had shaped it. He turns it once in his hand, as if listening. You do not comment on men who hold a key for a breath and act as if they have contributed. He returns it. You wipe it with the edge of your sleeve because incense leaves a soft bloom on metal that pretends to be piety. You thread it back onto your ring where the pantry key receives it with the aloofness of long service. Iron recognizes iron. The clerk, satisfied with the ceremony of not opening anything, leads you to the small table where a roll of names waits beside a dish that holds nothing but good intentions. You sign where your name already lives, a mark simple enough not to make a fuss. The churchwarden arrives late, bringing a draught of air. He nods to your belt before he nods to your face. People who manage locks learn to greet the tool before the hand. You stand for a moment under the arch where the nave meets the aisle and count the sounds. A cough tangled in stone, a sparrow's bold wing in the rafters, the polite scuffle of someone pretending not to hurry. Your keys settle against your gown, quiet now that they have visited their cousin lock. You take the token for candles from your basket and leave it with the clerk, who writes a note that will later become light. On your way out, you pause at the poor box, which is not as proud as the chest, and therefore braver. You place a halfpenny through the slot and listen for the honest clink that says metal met wood, and both agreed to be useful. You are not moved to great generosity, only to correct measure. Correct measure keeps the world from wobbling. Outside, the square has arranged itself into late morning. The sun remembers its business. The chandler's stall smells of honey and smoke. You exchange the token for 2 stout tapers that do not pretend to be finer than they are, and a handful of brittle ends the chandler would otherwise sweep away. Ends will be ends again after a warm afternoon with a pot and a wick. Keys at your side approve of thrift that locks nothing but habit. You turn toward home by the lane that chooses shade over gossip. The basket holds candles and promises. The purse is lighter by a thought and heavier by satisfaction. The ring of keys rests where it always rests, the little church key tucked among household teeth as if it had always belonged there. You prefer it that way. A woman who keeps bread and salt may also keep 1/3 of a parish chest without losing the knack of folding clean linen. At your door you lift the latch with the same hand that held the guild's note and the church's key. Different houses, same language. The maid's broom has made its progress. The floor confesses only to clean. You hang your veil back a finger's width and let the house breathe you in. The keys give a single, small sound, the kind that claims nothing and keeps everything. You set the candles on the table, touch the belt to settle it on your hip, and allow yourself the luxury of a thought you rarely say aloud. Iron at the waist is not for show, it is for steadiness. It is how you walk from guild to parish to home without asking anyone else to open your day. Noon arrives in the modest way of noon in a sensible streetlight straightening on the table, shadows agreeing to behave, the hearth settling into the dignified business of holding warmth rather than proving it. You do not ring for anything. You do not make speeches to your own stomach. You set a bowl on the table and allow the day to continue. The broth remembers bones and onions, but not extravagantly. It carries the hint of bay, a whisper of pepper that you pretend you did not allow, and a sheen that tells you the morning's fire was neither sulky nor greedy. You tilt the pot and let the liquid crest the lip with a sound like rain finding a stone. Steam rises. It smells like patience put into a pan. The heel of bread, too proud to be soft, receives the knife's insistence. The crust answers with a proper crackle. The crumb gives at last and shows you tidy holes like little cellars. You butter nothing. Butter belongs to other moods. You lay the slice on the board and find that your hand has already lifted the salt pinch you did not promise yourself. Grain falls, few but decisive. You sit. The bench takes your weight without commentary. Keys settle against your waist as if relieved to be included in the meal by nearness alone. They rest like small sleeping birds, which is to say they remain ready to startle into purpose if anyone dares suggest the pantry is open. The spoon is pewter, honest, faintly rough along the rim where many evenings have taught it humility. You dip, blow, and taste. The first sip collects the morning into one mouthful, hearth soot and onion sweetness, and the good friendliness of water that learned flavor. It warms the throat like a blessing that had the sense to be brief. The maid steps through the hall with careful feet, broom at rest now, apron showing the day's progress in pale smears of ash. She keeps silence because noon prefers it. You nod toward the board's edge where the smaller bowl waits. She understands and pours a modest portion, lifts her eyes in question at the salt, declines without words, and takes her place on the settle that faces the wall instead of the open door. You approve. A person may choose calm on purpose. Outside, the lane arranges a few noises to remind you it exists. A cart finds a rut and argues with it. Someone laughs at a joke not designed to travel. A dog announces his deep expertise on the subject of geese. None of it requests your keys. You allow it all to pass under the door like weather. The boy brings kindling stacked like letters, thinks better of making a pile by the hearth, and sets it along the wall as you taught him ends even, no theatrics. He peeks at the pot as if broth could promote him. You tilt your spoon toward the ladle. He takes a scoop, sits on the threshold stone with the reverence of a petitioner facing a saint, and concentrates on not spilling heat on his own knees. Success earns him a nod. He glows brighter than the bowl. You tear the bread heel into a piece that understands the size of a mouth. You dip it. The broth climbs obediently into its holes. The bite has the exact workmanlike pleasure you expected. Bread, salt, heat. There are afternoons built on less. You chew until the crust decides to allow swallowing, and let the spoon continue what the bread began. Across the room, the sunlight finds the pewter on the sideboard and makes a reasonable attempt at glory. You look at the locked silver coffer on the shelf above and feel it trying to be relevant. It fails politely. Pewter holds noon better than silver does. Silver is for guests who prefer to see themselves reflected. You prefer soup. You shift your belt to finger's breadth so the ring sits flat. The keys murmur against wool, no more than a courteous clearing of throats. The pantry has been shut again. The linen press has had its moment. The grain bin believes in you. They can nap. You will wake them when afternoon brewing asks for its latch, or when the cheese shelf wants a visit. You let the spoon hover and do the small counting you always do at this hour, the ledger that lives behind your eyes. Loaves, 2.5. Ale, agreeable. Soap, indecisive. Candles, sufficient for vespers and manners. Charcoal, not yet a worry. Lavender, the sachets will endure another fortnight. The household book will hear the same, later, written in words short enough not to boast. On the hearth, the log gives a gentle sigh, collapsing into a red that means it is trying to be helpful in a quieter key. You rake it once to encourage evenness and lay the poker aside. The boy imitates the movement with his spoon, which is forgiven on account of enthusiasm and absence of embers. You eat again, slower, because noon is not a race anyone can win. The broth cools enough to show more flavor and less steam. You find the bay leaf and push it to the rim like a boat at low tide. Pepper pricks your lip with an opinion it cannot defend. Water answers back with democracy. The maid finishes and folds her hands for a minute that counts as rest without declaring itself so. Her gaze travels to your belt, as it often does, not in envy but in study. You let the keys be seen. Ownership is not a glare, it is a vocabulary. She will learn the words one latch at a time. From the chapel end of the square comes the faint ring of a bell that cannot quite decide whether it is ringing for prayer or for punctuality. You lift your bowl to your lips and take the last of the warmth. It is a kind of amen, domestic and sufficient. The spoon lies across the rim like a thin bridge between hunger and its opposite. You wipe the board with the cloth kept for wiping boards. The gesture is smaller than a thought and larger than most remedies. The crumbs agree to be gathered. The bowl walks itself to the scullery under your hand. Water in the basin tries it cold and mostly succeeds. Pewter blushes under the cloth and comes back to itself without argument. You set the bowl upside down to dry and take the last small corner of bread, the one that has decided to be future rather than present. You wrap it and set it in its place. You do not lock the bread cupboard for this moment. You simply close it with the authority of someone who will lock it later. Doors understand intention. Before you stand fully, you let your palm rest flat on the table. The wood is warm where the bowl was, cool where the light has not favored it. Keys lie quiet. Noon, satisfied with itself, begins to edge toward afternoon. You welcome the change. There is brewing to unfasten and curds to consider, notes to make and a shutter to tempt with breeze. But for one more breath, you sit with broth finished and iron at peace, and you admit that a house kept by locks and habits is not a cage. It is a nest that knows its own outline. You rise. The bench says nothing rude about knees. The keys lift with you and take their appointed place at your side. Small sleeping birds open one eye, see that nothing foolish has been proposed, and go back to their nap. Sensible, you think. Afternoon will wake everyone gently enough. After the bowl and the bench and the polite business of noon, you choose a corner of light that does not shout and lay out the quiet implements that keep iron and leather on speaking terms. The small workbox answers to the thin, immodestly confident key. It opens with a prim sigh. Inside are the plain remedies, all with its burnished handle, 2 needles that have mended more opinions than cloth, a twist of waxed thread, scraps of leather trimmed from old straps that fail to understand moderation, and a thimble slickened by use. Beeswax waits in a little cake, the colour of good butter, smelling faintly of summer and industry. You bring the belt to the table as if to a physician. It behaves. The loop nearest the buckle your favourite, and therefore the one that takes liberties, has stretched again into a narrow frown. The thong that holds the pantry key shows a tired shine where leather thins. Keys may be iron, but what carries them is skin and patience. Neither pretends to immortality. You draw the awl along the loop's seam and listen for the small groan that says the holes remember where they were. They do. Holes have better memory than people claim. With your thumb, you smooth the leather until it relaxes. Then measure the lay of the loop against the belt. 2 finger widths will keep it from wandering. You cut a narrow strip from a veteran's scrap, oiled, sensible, willing to become a reinforcement, and set it aside where it will not escape. The thread receives its beeswax like a pen receiving ink. You pull it through, slow and steady, until the wax makes it obedient and blunt gloss. A needle on each end, because stubborn things are best persuaded from both sides at once. You rest the belt across your knee and set the awl to it, pricking new holes just ahead of the old, enough to argue with weakness without insulting it. The awl bites, withdraws, and leaves a dark little well that looks surprised and then decides to be useful. You stitch in the rhythm your hands know, right needle forward, left needle through, tug until the seam sings a low note but does not creak. The belt warms under your palm. Leather likes attention that does not perform. You fold the reinforcing strip over the loop and send the needles through both layers, crossing the thread flat, neat, patient. When the seam reaches the end, you take 2 back stitches, those quiet anchors that prevent boastful unraveling, and flatten the set with the back of the thimble. The loop sits up straighter, as if reminded of its upbringing. Now the thong. You untie it from the ring and run it through your fingers. It is still willing, but thin at the bend and glossy where it rubs. You could scold it for overwork, you do not. You choose a thicker scrap, cut it into a narrow strip with the small knife whose edge does not advertise itself, and pull the strip over a damp cloth to give it a little grace. Leather loosens when it drinks. You rub a whisper of tallow along its length, so it will remember to be supple when the next frost tries to forge manners upon it. You notch the ends for a better knot and set the keys aside one by one. They enjoy being considered. The pantry key, broad and good-natured, waits. The long shank for the grain bin glints in a way that says it understands stores. The square-headed cellar key pretends not to glint. Sellers disapprove of showing off. You thread the new thong through the ring, test its glide, and return each key in its order, leaving 2 grains worth of space between them so they will not chatter when you turn or start when you sit. Keys are colleagues, not hens. The maid passes, slows, and pretends to adjust the broom because she wants to see. You let her look, and you do not narrate. Mending is better learned by watching hands than by listening to mouths. She will remember the sound the waxed thread makes, soft, decisive, almost like the hush of a small door, and that will be enough to begin. You turn to the belt holes. The middle one grows smug in a season, the one before it sulks. You choose neither. Pierce a fresh hole where your waist has settled this year, and line it with a tiny ring of wax so the buckle tongue will not drink the leather's patience too quickly. Nothing is permanent. Everything is maintained. Keys know this. So do houses. You prefer to be on their side. The ring itself has begun to mark the belt with a shadow where it lies. You ease a narrow keeper over the strap, a small loop you stitched last winter from a saintly bit of old bridle. It sits beneath the iron and supports the weight, taking some strain from the main loop. The ring appreciates the courtesy by not stating so. You test the arrangement by standing and walking the length of the hall. Once, twice, the third time, with a turn to see how the keys behave when you change your mind. They answer in their small, well-bred voices. No clatter. A brush against wool here, a single contented tap there. You adjust the pantry key a finger's breadth inward so its head does not kiss the buckle. Better. You bend to touch the floor and the belt stays where it should. Habit applauds. On the table, you lay the old thong and tie 3 experimental knots in its still strong end, to remind your fingers of which holds best on a day with rain, which unties after a long walk, which offends, and then you untie them again, because practice should not be mistaken for clutter. The scraps go into the workbox to become future patches, or nothing at all. You refuse to decide for them before their time. You take the waxed cloth, stroke it once along the edge of the belt where wear shows pale, not polishing, only feeding. The scent of beeswax warms the air, and with it a memory of comb and hive and a summer ditch lined with clover that did not know you were thinking of leather then. You set the cloth aside. The real polishing will come when evening makes conversation with lamplight. Iron enjoys a slower hour. For now, leather is content. You tie the loose ends of thread around the card where thread lives, set the needles back in their felt, press the awl into its niche, and turn the small key in the little lock. It clicks with a modesty you respect. Tools like to be kept as much as food does. You mark the household book. Belt loop reinforced. Pantry thong replaced. Ring steadied. 3 small notes. 1 small life held together by them. You add, in the margin, the whisper of a reminder, neat's foot when weather cools, and then strike the last word, because you prefer to leave oil to horsemen. Tallow will do. You write instead. The book accepts revision with the quiet of a servant who knows you are saving coins on purpose. You stand, lift the belt on your hips, and settle the ring where it has always liked to be. The weight is slightly different now, more agreeable, less wandering. You give the keys the smallest shape. They answer like well-mannered acquaintances, greeting one another in a porch. Present, composed, unexcited. Outside, a cloud drifts past the sun, and the room dims and brightens as if to admire your work and think better of making a fuss. The maid returns the broom to its peg the proper way up. The boy trots by with a bundle of sticks more square than his shoulders, and you allow yourself to suppose that order spreads the way the smell of wax does, gently, without permission, and for the good of all. You sit for a breath and give thanks, not aloud, and not in a way that would make the church ring any bells. Only a plain gratitude for leather that holds when asked, and for thread that obeys wax, and for keys that accept a new thong without drama. Small things that consent to mending make the world behave. You tie the loose hair under your veil again, because it has ambitions unsuited to the afternoon, and you rise. The belt moves with you as if it had planned to do so all along. The ring rests, the thongs lie, the keys keep their counsel until called. You lay your hand over them once, an absent-minded benediction, and they answer with a quiet, sensible weight that says the round may continue. There is the maid to walk through thresholds, the book to listen to rents, the mash tun to unlatch in its hour. All of that goes better when a loop sits right. You step back into the hall. The house notices, not because you announce, but because iron returns to its ordinary work on your hip, and the floor hears the small, pleased tap of order returning to its own shoes. Afternoon carries on. Your belt is ready to keep up, and you are ready to let it. You find the maid in the passage with broom and cloth, stalled where hearth gives way to buttery. You do not sigh. Doors cure more confusion than sighs do. Come, you say, and keep it soft. At the pantry, you tap the plank as you would greet a sensible neighbour. This stays shut, unless I am with you. The broad key turns to the first resistance, and back, teaching the latch both obedience and patience. She nods as though the wood had spoken. The buttery hatch swings up for ale and down for quiet. When you sweep, prop it. When finished, let it rest. The peg drops, the frame approves. A door can be open, you add, and not invited. For the scullery you open only enough for air to remember its duty, then tilt the settle a finger's width. Air, yes, eyes, no. She smiles. The house has given her a polite way to manage strangers. Keys brush wool as you walk. At the stair to the solar you lay a hand on the bolt. No need today. You draw it anyway, iron answering with a satisfied scrape. If water must go up, ask. The chest above dislikes surprises. She glances at your belt and remembers where authority lives. The counting corner keeps a curtain instead of a lock. Curtains ask courtesy, you say. You give a word and then wait for mine. She agrees, which saves you speeches. At the back entry you fit the bar into its hooks, lift it out, fit it again, then lean it against the wall so she sees the whole movement the way wood grows lighter when it knows its job. This keeps weather, beasts, and hurry out. If someone forgets the latch, the bar remembers. She tests it, finds the weight honest, and sets it back with more care than she brought to it. You bring her to the linen press, though she already knows its scent. Open for need, close for habit, you say, sliding the long key into its placid lock. Lavender rises like a small hymn. Take what I tell. When you return cloth, keep the fold that is already there. She follows, lift, settle, turn, listen for the neat click. Back at the pantry, not to open but to listen. Mice will test this scene, you say, showing the lower edge. They believe in optimism. We believe in iron. A breath of tallow on the hinge will keep it from announcing itself. Squeaks are an invitation. Locks are a conclusion. She lets a small laugh behave and keeps the lesson. Now the keys. You place the ring in her palm. The weight wakens her fingers. Feel them, do not look. Under her thumb, pantry broad, press long, grain shallow, cellar square, chest blunt, needle box thin. You will not carry them, you add, taking them back, but learn their shapes the way you learn steps in the dark. You tie the ring where it lives. Why do I wear them? So your hand finds what it needs. So others see that keeping travels with you. So doors do not become questions. You lift an eyebrow, so no one borrows a door by mistake. She finishes the polite truth. Practice, then. Before you dismiss her, you show the small courtesies that keep order from fraying. How a broom passes a threshold sideways so bristles do not bruise a jam. How pegs like to face down, not up. lest they think themselves important. How a latch is lifted with 2 fingers and not the whole hand, so the wood forgets to swell with pride. Little manners, you say, make big repairs unnecessary. She tries each motion until her hands repeat them without asking her head for permission. Latch the lane door to friendly, and she sets the catch that looks welcoming and is not. Set the buttery hatch to breeze, and she chooses the peg hole that keeps it from flirting with wind. Draw the counting curtain to private, and she lets the edge lie exactly along the lintel, neither gap nor gather. You nod. She nods. The house nods. For her hands, a task of patience. Polish these, you say, offering the little keys that open boxes rather than stores. Cloth, a drop of oil, quiet circles, teeth wiped without scouring shoulders. Remind them they matter, you say, but do not let them think they shine. She sits where the light minds its manners and rubs until metal looks content to be itself. While she works, you mark the book. Maid shown doors, pegs, bar, curtain, shapes named, small keys oiled. Then you listen. Fewer squeaks. Hinges that breathe instead of complain. A hatch holding its opinion without applause. The scritch of cloth on iron, the steady breath of concentration without pride. You return with the tiniest chess key. A test. She tries the work, box, does not force when the first angle refuses. Tries again, feels the ward give. The lid lifts, tools lie within, satisfied to be understood. You let the lid fall, and the lock click. Good, you say, and spend the word like a coin, because you do not spend it often. One last boundary that is really a courtesy. At the pantry you turn the broad key fully, remove it, and hang it back on your ring. If someone asks you to open this, tell them it is not your door to answer. She inclines her head. She has seen your purse knot. She knows doors and knots serve the same master. Measure. The lesson ends in the yard, which keeps its own thresholds. You give her a basket and a sheaf of straw. She steps out the back, sets the bar while she is beyond, and lifts it again on return, without rattling the hooks. You hear the difference and allow the mild satisfaction that arrives whenever iron decides to behave for someone you have taught. Your keys lie warm at your side. The house breathes easier. Boundaries do not make rooms smaller. They make rooms sure of themselves. You will teach the boy later, in pieces that suit his pride bolts that obey, not curtains that suggest. For now, you watch afternoon lengthen across the floor and listen to the sound a kept house makes. Doors that answer when spoken to and keep silent when not. The counting corner waits where light behaves. A table tucked beneath the small window whose leaded panes prefer honesty to brilliance. You draw the coffer key from its hidden pocket in your belt, the winter evening pocket you stitched when thrift decided to be clever. The key is shorter than the household teeth, square-headed and sure of its manners. It warms quickly in your palm, as if pleased to be asked. The coffer stands on its own low frame, neither chest nor box, but an opinion about money given wood and iron. You lay a hand on the lid first. Wood likes to be greeted. The key slides in and touches the ward with a familiar pause, then yields. Locks that keep coins behave like sensible parish clerks, respectful, faintly bored, happiest when closed again. Inside, folded notes tied with twine, a small roll of parchment that would enjoy being admired, a linen-wrapped seal matrix, a bag that whispers when you lift it, and a shallow tray for tallies. Everything sits as if it arranged itself. You nudge 2 corners into greater virtue, and the coffer forgives the pretense. The air smells of beeswax, old ink, and the dry, bookish dust that arrives when arithmetic lives somewhere long enough. You set out the things that make order speak: household book, ink horn, quill with a prudent nib, penknife, a shell of drying sand, a taper for sealing. The quill scratches, the penknife trims, the feather agrees to be useful. You coax the taper alight, and lay the stick of sealing wax near the flame to grow thoughtful but not dramatic. Warmth persuades better than zeal. Coins first. Pennies whose faces have become rumours, halfpennies that try to escape through their lightness, 2 groats with more dignity than company, and a larger piece behaving like a guest who found the right door. You tilt them into a dish and listen to their language of edge and weight. Enough for dews, enough for soap, if soap stops pretending to be rare. Enough for oat groats, not enough for foolishness. You write the sum in a hand that refuses poetry and dries with a sigh of sand. Next, the tallies. Paired sticks parted honestly, your half here, your neighbour's half elsewhere. You match notch to notch. Some cuts are generous, some mean, as if the knives had opinions about rent. Wood tells the truth with a dry wit. You accept each truth into the margin and let the sand pat it dry. You open the bundle of notes, requests, acknowledgements, small apologies, the cobbler's widow's line in the guild hand, a complaint about hens that admire your garden too earnestly. You answer on the backs in a smaller script because space is a courtesy. Yes, at St. Crispin's, returned the hen by dusk. Half now, half at Lammas. Iron Gall ink carries your calm across the page without asking for praise. For rents received, you slide coins into the small bag and pull its mouth together with the knot you trust. Wax softens, the seal stamp presses. Your plain mark settles into the round red with a modest authority. Resin scents the air. You hold the string until the wax learns not to smear. Then set the bag in the deep corner where finished business enjoys being forgotten. You write a line for the steward about the candle token redeemed and the chandler's brittle ends saved from sweeping. You add a brief word about the lane's rut that pitches cartwheels, the sort of sentence that compels a spade more than a speech. Words for stewards are like salt use enough, do not startle the soup. The purse shows a bruise where coins rubbed. You decide the soap will wait for cooler weather when dirt grows opinionated. You list the cabbages that smelled of field, the decent fish that refused to smell of yesterday, and the oats that will keep the pot convinced of its purpose. 2 farthings become a small note to the cobbler for the boy's heel, cheaper than a limp and freer than pride. The quill asks for trimming again. You lift the knife, shave a moon-white curl, test the nib against your thumb, and give it another sip of ink. It writes more willingly. Willing tools make honest books. You prefer an obedient scratch to a beautiful blot. Once more you look down the column. Coins counted, tallies married, notes answered, bag sealed, sand shaken, bookmarked. You place each thing where it lives, not because you expect thieves, but because confusion is the sneakier thief and deserves a locked door daily. The seal returns to its linen, warm enough to ignore damp, modest enough to make no boast from its heat. Light shifts in the small window, cloud passing, brightness returning with the modesty you appreciate. You let your ear count the house. Broom paused and set against its peg, kindling stacked into squares. A chair pushed back with the courtesy that keeps rushes from complaining. The faintest, kindest tap of keys at your hip when you shift your weight. This corner has no lock, and yet it is kept. The belt sees to that. You close the coffer. The lid lowers with the quiet finality of a sentence that knows where to stop. The key turns once, withdraws, and returns to the pocket you made for it. The taper straightens its small flame, as if to say you have asked enough. Sand slips back into its shell with a hiss like a whispered amen. The book ties with its faded cord and looks pleased to be plain. You remain seated for the short space that comes after sums and before thresholds. The peace is not triumph. It is the gentler satisfaction of lines that add without quarrel. Money does not love anyone. It merely behaves for keepers who neither flatter nor scold. Your finger touches the sealed knot and finds it smooth under the wax, a little hill that will not forget who closed it. You stand. The bench remembers your weight without creaking. The belt takes the shift and settles the keys into their civil places. Afternoon waits with brewing to coax and curds to consider, perhaps a visitor who will admire the door and not be invited past it. You leave the counting table as you found it, except cleaner, which is how you prefer to leave everything you plan to meet again. You pause in the middle of the hall as someone might pause at a window, not to admire a view but to let sense arrange itself. The belt sits where it prefers, the ring lying against wool as if it grew there. A small shift of your hip sends the keys into their courteous tap, that nearly secret note that belongs to keepers and corridors. Why do they hang at your waist? Because this is where your hand lives. Because doors answer faster when you do not go hunting for permission. People ask as if a story waited under the leather, something grand about inheritance or solemn vows. You could tell stories, but they would step on the truth's feet. Keys hang at your waist because the pantry is not a sermon. It is a box that refuses to open itself. Because salt lives longer when iron says so. Because ale behaves for the person who is present, and locks make presence clear. Because your house should not have to guess who is in charge any more than a street should have to guess which way rain chooses. A nail on the wall would hold the ring, yes, and then every hand would hold the ring. A drawer would keep them clean, yes, and then you would teach your feet to walk toward confusion. At the waist, they ride exactly where thought becomes action. The path from need to answer is a span of fingers, and the time it takes iron to agree. You find this efficient. Your neighbors find it persuasive. Efficiency and persuasion have never argued in your hall. You are not the only one to do it, and that is part of the answer. Women keep houses, houses keep stores. Stores keep families from the game's hunger plays. Keys show who minds the keeping. The maid sees them and knows which doors are not questions. The boy sees them and learns that curiosity is not a master key. The neighbor sees them and decides to discuss weather instead of favors. The baker sees them and remembers to wrap loaves with less air and more bread. Iron at the waist is a language others have already learned. It is also a language you speak to yourself. Weight reminds. You feel the small press where the ring rests, and it prevents wool from drifting and thoughts from wandering. A belt without keys is a garment. A belt with keys is a list you wear. You do not need to mutter pantry, press, chest, cellar. Your side does that counting for you. If your mind tries to take a holiday, iron declines to travel. There is comfort in how the metal learns your shape too. The teeth grow familiar, smoothing where they touch leather, accepting oil and cloth as their daily diet. They do not flatter with shine, they consent to serve. At the waist they warm slightly, answering your heat the way a cat might aloof, then companionable. Warm iron turns more willingly. That is not romance, only craft. A key on a nail remains cold and sulks. A key at your side thinks about being useful. You wear them where others wear ornaments. Some women drape a string of glass, some a ribbon, some a brooch that proposes a flower in winter. You wear the pantry, you wear the grain bin. You wear the chest that notices feast days, and the needle box that repairs the moods of cloth. If anyone thinks this less pretty, they are welcome to bring their beauty to your door and ask to be fed without salt. You will enjoy their reconsideration. There is, as always, a small cruelty you decline to invite. Keys that swing too freely speak too loudly. Keys that hide entirely invite questions. You find the middle place. The ring tucks under the keeper you stitched. The thongs leave a finger's space between each tooth. The belt holds the weight and refuses to quarrel with it. When you walk, they touch wool like manners. When you sit, they lie still because you have arranged them to be still. Quiet is a habit you insist upon even in iron. Sometimes a man notices them in the street and becomes thoughtful as if weather had just shifted or a road had decided to lead elsewhere. Let him be thoughtful. He will remember that a house with keys at the mistress's waist is a house that pays its debts and expects the same. He will also remember that such a house keeps a decent ale, which is the argument most men respect and the least insulting to win. There are holy reasons offered now and then, parables about stewardship, little comparisons between household and kingdom. You do not quarrel with parables, but you prefer doors. A parable will not keep mice from the flour. A well-cut tooth will. Hang the tooth where you can reach it. If heaven disapproves, it has kept a respectful silence about your pantry so far. At night, when the house draws its breath long and low, you hear the keys decide how much noise they will make in the dark. A small note to tell you where your hip is, that is all. The corridor, and you share a map in iron syllables. You carry the lamp, and the lamp asks you to mind your steps. The keys tell you where the door waits, and the door rewards your hand for knowing it. You could set the ring by the bed and be almost as safe. Almost is a word that invites mischief. There is also the matter of who asks you to open what. Keys on display become conversation. Keys at your side are answers. "May I?" asks a voice at the buttery. The ring touches your gown. "No," says the ring without your mouth's help, or "Yes, because I am present." Presence is the true lock. Iron only underlines it. You remember the day you first took the ring from a different peg and moved it to your belt. Not triumph, only the relief of taking a tool into your hand instead of waiting for it to be lent. People like to pretend transfer of keys is a ceremony. It is a ceremony in the same way. Laying kindling is a ceremony. Brief, necessary, made of parts that catch, if you have arranged them properly. After the first hour, what remains is work, and the pleasant fatigue of locks that behave for you. Still, there is a dignity in the sight. The black of your gown, the leather's dark line, the iron's modest gleam, plain heraldry. If you were inclined to heraldry, you are not. You enjoy the steadiness more than the symbol, yet the symbol is useful to other eyes, so you let it be. Children behave better for pictures than for definitions. Adults are not entirely different. And finally, keys hang here because you are a widow, and the house has decided not to argue with you about it. Mourning begins as a cloth and becomes a rhythm. The veil speaks to strangers. The belt speaks to doors. You do not wear grief as decoration. You wear it as a boundary. Within that boundary, live bread and linen, ale and salt, curds and candles, coins, and the courtesy that prevents coins from spoiling people. Broad reasons, narrow teeth. The afternoon leans toward brewing. You touch the ring once, that absent-minded benediction your hand has learned. It feels the pantry, the grain, the cellar, the chest, the little church key tucked among them like a cousin who visits on holy days. All of them present, none jealous, each companion sure of its purpose. Why do they hang at your waist? Because your day does. Because a house kept in small turns stays kept in large ones. Because nothing you answer for should have to find you. You shift your hip, the ring agrees. You reach for the latch that leads to the yard, and without looking, bring forward the key that will later persuade the mash tun to remember it likes to be open. The yard keeps a different quiet in the afternoon, a warmth that does not hurry you but expects you to choose something worth warming. You choose brewing. The shed door minds a hasp and a pin, no grand lock, only the sort of latch that makes mice reconsider a career in ale. Your keys brush your gown anyway, companions who like to attend ceremonies even when not invited to speak. You lift the pin, swing back the hasp, and the door opens on the familiar breath of wood, ash, and the faint sweetness that lingers where malt once told its long, patient stories. Inside, the copper squats over its hearth like a sensible Bishop Broad, convinced of its own usefulness, not much interested in debate. You set a hand to the mash tun's lid, feel the cool of the wood that will soon learn steam, and lift it enough to remind the staves how to behave. The iron strap that holds the lid when you want it held answers your fingers with a mild clink. No key needed here. The lock is in the rhythm rather than the metal. The boy appears in the doorway before you call him, because brewing calls boys the way bells call crows. He carries kindling stacked as if he fears to be accused of crookedness. You tilt your head toward the hearth. He kneels and builds the fire in the letter your family uses for start. Thin sticks crossed, tinder tucked where it can eavesdrop on the first spark. You hand him the striker. He strikes without boasting. The tinder accepts the arrangement. Flames begin by clearing their throats and then remember they are fire. Water fills the copper from the bucket you prefer for tasks that deserve clean wood. You pour, listen, pour again. The copper receives it with a hollow sound that changes pitch as the level rises, like a barrel learning a new thought. Steam begins as a rumour. You stir with the scold stick to keep the bottom from deciding to prove a point about heat. The boy watches the surface for the small tremor that means warmth is arriving and not apologizing. You fetch the sack of crushed malt from its dry corner. It smells like bread, remembering childhood grain, sun, a hint of field that never learnt to be indoor. You loosen the twine and let your hand sink to test the grind. Not flour, not kernels, the middle state that knows how to give its sweetness without sulking. You nod to the sack as if it had offered sense. It has. When the copper tells you the water is right, not by any measure fancier than a finger, you have burned often enough to learn manners. You ladle it into the mash tun. Wood creaks and settles. Steam rises in a white patience that softens the air. You pour in the malt a scoop at a time, stirring with the long mash paddle in circles that never seem to end because they are not meant to. The tun answers with a sound like wet bread making up its mind. You stir until dry islands sink and no flour hides at the rim. The brew takes on that comforting colour between straw and brown that makes you think of fields seen through eyelids. The keys at your side grow warmer as the room does. They tap your hip once when you lean to lift, then lie still, listening. The boy breathes louder than the mash, which is saying something. You hand him the paddle, guide his grip so he stirs without punishing the wart, and let him see how even circles persuade better than vigour. The paddle cuts a quiet path, and the tun settles to the work of steeping grain, giving up what it can, water learning what it should. Lid down now. You set it on, snug under the iron strap, and tuck a cloth along the rim to discourage draughts. Let it think. You tell the boy. He nods solemnly, as if he had been introduced to a scholar. There is waiting in all honest crafts. You consider it the price of being necessary. While the mash rests, you sweep the shed floor where chaff tried to stage a performance. The broom edits. You check the tap at the bottom of the tun, wooden, tight, not inclined to surprise you. A small wedge keeps it honest. You seat it with a tap of the mallet that passes for conversation among joiners. The underback, your little tub that waits to catch sweetness, sits ready, clean and minded by a cloth kept for this alone. You do not rehearse what comes next. You have rehearsed it enough to call it memory. While steam braids itself with the smell of malt, you mend a loose thong on the shed latch with 2 quick stitches and a dab of tallow. Not everything is brewing, but everything is keeping. The boy asks without words whether he may touch the lid. You answer without words that he may not. He studies the copper instead and counts to a number he finds impressive. Time passes anyway. When the mash has had its say, you lift the strap, set the lid aside, and stir once more, slowly, to wake the sweetness from the bottom. The paddle moves through a body that has thickened, agreeable as porridge with ambitions. You settle the lid again, but only lightly this time, and set the underback under the tap. The wedge comes free, the tap turns, the wort begins to run amber, clear enough to please you, carrying the day's first promise you might be willing to drink. The stream makes its own music, modest but pleased with itself. You watch the first bowlful, judge it as you would judge a loaf's crumb, and allow yourself a thin smile. The boy does not blink, as if blinking might offend gravity. You let the wort collect, then carry the tub to the copper with both hands and pour it back, feeding sweetness forward into heat. This will not be the last time you lift it. Strength is part of steadiness. You practice both. You lift a ladleful and let a string fall between your fingers, testing stickiness with the same ordinary nose and tongue that keep the soup from sulking. Sweet, but not foolish. Grain forward, smoke polite, field and hearth agreeing to share a bowl. You nod your grandest compliment and continue the slow work of running and returning until the tun gives you what you ask and keeps what it must. There will be herbs later, if the mood and the purse permit yarrow, a touch of alicost, a pinch of something bitter enough to remind sweetness of its place. Not yet. For now the copper gathers warmth and the wort thinks about bubbles. You skim the early froth with the broad spoon, not because it offends you, but because it prefers the bowl. The shed grows dreamlike with haze. Your veil remembers steam and forgives it. You glance at the door. The latch sits right. The pin stands by. The world outside is the same, only brighter. Inside, the craft proceeds. Keys at your waist keep their silence because brewing has no locks to turn, only decisions. Still, their weight comforts. The pantry will open later for a heel of bread for the boy who stirred properly. The ale cellar will consent tomorrow to admit the first jug when it cools and clarifies. All of that is written already in iron and in habit. The boy asks finally, "How long?" You answer with the length of a prayer you never say aloud, and the sweep of a broom over the shed floor. Once, twice, thrice. He nods as if you had given him a number. You give him the paddle again, let him stir 3 turns for practice, then take it back before he earns blisters that would argue with the woodpile. Praise is a measured grain. You allow a pinch. When the runnings grow pale and the mash begins to sound like someone repeating themselves, you close the tap, lift the underback away, and let the ton rest. Later, the spent grain will meet the pig with more gratitude than conversation. For now, you tend the copper and its gently shifting surface, coaxing the line between simmer and sulk. You wipe your hands on the cloth that has survived worse afternoons and hang it back on its nail. The mash tun stands with its lid ajar, satisfied. The copper hums a note older than your house. You check the fire, shift a stick, trim a flame, and step back so heat can admire itself. Brewing is a task that rewards patience with another task. You prefer such rewards. You set the latch on the shed door but do not pin it. You will be in and out until the light leans toward evening. As you pass, your keys brush wool and speak their small companionable syllable. You do not need them for the ton, and still you are glad they came. Some duties require iron, some require steam, all require the person who keeps both from wandering. The coolness of the shed lingers on your sleeves as you step back into the house, but now another chamber waits with its own voice. The cheese shelf, narrow and steady, lives in the storeroom where air stays even and light minds its manners. Its door is small but locked, because curds are stubborn and guests too curious. You draw the right key forward on its thong, the one with the narrow neck and the teeth cut a little deeper, made for bolts that do not trust butterfingers. The lock responds with a low clunk, as if reluctant to be disturbed, then gives way. Inside, the smell greets you sharp, sour sweet, edged with grass that has long since forgotten field. Rounds sit on their wooden boards, pale and thick, their rinds darkened into rough skins. Some wear cloth bandages, spotted with age but doing their duty. Between them, you see the small rennet bag hung on its peg, leather shrunk, still damp with the memory of curdling. It gives the air its faint, animal tang, and you nod to it like an old accomplice. You lift one round carefully, its surface firm beneath your palms. A soft bloom of mould traces its side, white and green as lichen on stone. This is not a flaw, only proof that the shelf does its work. You set the round back down, turning it half a turn, because cheeses like to be reminded that balance is a habit. Cool shadows settle along the boards. You wipe the shelf edge with a cloth, not to clean it but to remind it of attention. The maid peers in, curious, and wrinkles her nose. "It smells," her face says. You let her face learn what her mouth need not speak. Food that lasts has every right to smell of its labour. You point to the cloth bandages. "Change them when I say." She nods, already plotting when she will hold her breath. The keys hang quiet at your hip, as if humouring the cheese, granting it a silence of its own. The rennet bag sways slightly on its thong, stirred by the breath of your movement. You check it with 2 fingers, still pliant, still useful, not yet a relic. The pigskin tub beneath holds curds set from yesterday, pressed under a flat stone. You lift the cloth, see the whey still seeping, pale and thin, then cover it again. Patience is the only seasoning here. You close the shelf door and turn the key until the lock consents. The sound is deep, like a promise whispered to itself. You return the key to its place on the ring, letting it nestle between its neighbours, and the belt settles back into its familiar curve. The air carries a faint tang of curd after you leave, a reminder that even shadows have flavour when watched by iron. Outside the chamber, the boy passes with a bundle of sticks, and the maid trails him with the broom. Neither remarks on the smell that follows you. They have learned. Some scents belong to households the way bells belong to parishes. Keys, curds, bolts, shadows, each has its duty. You hear the gate creak before the knock comes. A visitor. Courtesies require you to stand at the right side of the door, where the light does not betray your eyes. The latch rests easy under your palm, but you do not lift it yet. First, the key. It is not needed. but you let your fingers brush it all the same, to remind the wood who keeps the conversation. The maid looks up from her broom, eyebrows asking if she should open. You shake your head. Doors are a mistress's task when visitors stand beyond. She withdraws to the hearth, where her silence will not be mistaken for invitation. The knock is measured, not urgent. You slide the bar from its hooks and lift the latch. The door opens only as far as you allow, one hand on the edge, one foot braced. A neighbor stands there, hat in hand, speaking before you ask. He needs a measure of salt, he says, for a broth that will not quite taste of broth without it. You let the pause linger just long enough for him to notice the keys at your waist. Their weight is not loud, but it says what words need not. The decision belongs to you. You incline your head the smallest distance, then turn to fetch what is proper. The pantry key turns without complaint. The chest opens with its low breath. You measure a pinch into a folded scrap, tie it with thread, and return. At the threshold, you extend the packet. For broth, you say flat and kind. He thanks you with the quickness of a man who understands boundaries. You do not step aside. The door remains your companion. He retreats with gratitude and no presumption. You close the door, return the bar to its place, and the lock to its piece. Another knock later, this one quicker, less polished. You open enough to see a trader, peddling ribbons too bright for your gown and too thin for your patience. You rest your hand on the latch, smile with no teeth, and do not move your belt. The keys gleam faintly against the dark wool. He falters, mutters, and bows himself back toward the square. You close the door gently, because gentleness makes refusals harder to argue with. Not every visitor asks. Some stand at the gate, hats off, waiting for your eyes from the window. You greet them with the turn of the shutter, nothing more. Keys remain at your side, unspoken authority. A door half open can be more commanding than a hall thrown wide. You walk the passage once, touching each latch you passed. Pantry, shut, linen, quiet, chests, patient, buttery, modest. Each door holds the memory of your hand. Each bolt and bar knows its keeper. Visitors come and go, but the house remains in its proper voice. And the keys, their small chorus of iron, remind you that courtesy and caution are not enemies. They are neighbors who share the same doorframe. Weather does not ask if it may change. It simply does. By mid-afternoon, the air shifts, carrying a damp edge that makes beams groan, and shutters think of closing. You hear the mutter of wind against the lane and know what is coming long before the first patter on the roof. Rain in small drops, scattered at first, then committed. You move with the same calm you would show a child trying to prove a tantrum. Windows first. The latches are plain iron, curved like a shepherd's hook. You lift each in turn, close the leaded panes, and push them home with the pressure that tells wood it is wanted in its frame. Keys rest against your gown as you lean forward. Their weight reassures more than the bar of the latch does. The maid hovers, broom idle. You point her toward the shutters, already propped by the wall. Together you fit them across the window. Not too tight wood, prefers to breathe even in storms, but snug enough to make the rain choose another way inside. The hinges squeak in their old voices. You remind her that a rag with oil tomorrow will make them polite again. The outer door groans with its own opinion of weather. You draw the bar back, shut the plank, and set the iron drop into place. A click of the square-headed key, turned more for form than necessity, makes the lock confess that it will stay honest through the night. You walk the passage again, touching bolts and catches. Pantry, firm. Press, settled. Linen, quiet. Chests, already indifferent to rain. The sound on the roof grows louder, like beans scattered on a drum, then steadier. You allow it to surround you. The house holds. Iron keeps its promises. At the hearth, you rake the embers so their warmth pushes against the damp, trying the shutters. The boy watches, wide-eyed, then runs to fetch more sticks without being told. The maid sets a cloth where the drip from the lintel always appears first. She has learned. The keys on your belt make their small, companionable clink as you lower yourself onto the bench. Rain has many languages, but this one is simple. Stay inside. Close what should be closed. let time pass. You prefer it this way. The house folds itself tighter, boards settling into the rhythm, bolts content in their sockets, keys content in their thongs. The storm is not your concern, only the locks, and they are behaving. You mend your veil where the thread began to slacken. Not out of vanity, but because loose hems conspire with weather to make widows untidy. The cloth lies across your lap, black wool stretched against your knee, and the needle moves without asking you to look. The thread hums a low tune, in and out, small bites that draw the edge back into order. The keys rest on the bench beside you, their ring tilted like an idle ear. You touch them between stitches, not to use them, only to let their weight remind you that nothing strays far when iron keeps company. The rain outside has softened now, more whisper than lecture, and the house leans into it. A hem here, a veil there, this is the kind of sewing that asks little and answers enough. You fold the fabric's corner under and let the needle persuade it. Wool pulls slightly, but waxed thread wins the argument. You knot the end, press it flat with the nail of your thumb, and cut it close. The veil hangs straight again, not elegant but proper. Proper is better. Keys against cloth, cloth against knee, rain against shutter. You take them all together as a kind of rhythm, steadying without music. The boy sleeps in the settle's shadow, the maid hums softly while wiping pewter, and the storm forgets itself into drizzle. Nothing in the room waits to be mended, except what is already in your hand. You smooth the veil once, fold it back into its box, and let the small key turn in its latch. Iron and thread have done their part, neither proud of it. You set the ring back at your waist, its familiar press like punctuation at the end of a plain sentence. The house breathes out with you, content that nothing is frayed for now. You light a candle, not because you need more light, but because books and figures respect a flame more than they respect a window. The wick catches with a quiet sigh, and the little pool of wax forms in its usual hollow. The household book waits open where you left the ribbon, its pages showing rows of marks, some crisp, some smudged by haste. You sharpen the quill against your thumb with the small knife, testing the point until it scratches softly but not sharply. The keys on your belt settle as you sit, their weight pressing against your hip as if leaning closer to listen. You draw them forward once, as though counting them, then let them fall back again. They are not needed to write, but they are part of the record. Every line of ink depends on the iron that kept things in their cupboards and coins in their coffer. You begin with what was given. Bread, 3 loaves baked on Thursday, 2 eaten, 1 remaining. Broth simmered at noon, salt consumed but no spice, ale still resting in its cask, untouched until the steward calls. You mark these in the narrow script that takes less ink but enough space to keep honesty plain. Then what was kept. Grain locked and measured, chest sealed, linen untouched but aired. You add the note, press opened for teaching. Later, if you forget, the words will remind you what patience you offered to the maid. Coins counted, rent sealed, tally notched, all these find their place in the column, with strokes steady as the candle flame. The ink runs a little dry. You dip again, watching the quill darken to the right shade. The scratch across the page is not music, but it fills the air with its own rhythm. Beside it, the rain continues on the shutters, softer now, as if approving the balance. Finally, you add the smallest of entries. Latch mended, belt loop stitched. Some might laugh at such details. You know better. A latch unmentioned grows careless. A loop forgotten grows thin. The book does not mock. It only remembers, and remembering is half of keeping. When you set the quill down, the candle flame tilts, catching the edge of your veil in its glow. You close the book, tie the cord, and rest your palm upon it. The wax seal on the purse bag cools nearby, faintly red in the dim. The keys touch your side again as you stand, as if to remind you that what you write and what you lock are 2 halves of the same word. The room smells faintly of ink, tallow, and linen dust. Outside, dusk creeps nearer. The book is finished for now. The house waits for evening. Evening draws its own curtain, slower than you expect, faster than you admit. Candles wait in their holders, But the silver spoons, those particular little rebels of luxury, demand their attention first. Pewter may stay on the board without complaint, dull-faced and trustworthy, but silver must be watched. Silver believes itself both delicate and desired, which is reason enough to lock it away. You gather the spoons from their small box, one by one, their surfaces flashing only faintly in the last of the daylight. They feel cooler than pewter, smoother under your thumb, as if determined to distinguish themselves even in your plain hands. You do not admire them, you account for them. 1, 2, 3, 4, exactly as yesterday, no less, no more. The chest for silver rests against the wall, modest in its size but armed with a lock sharper in opinion than any other in the house. The key is narrow and exacting, a little proud of itself. You draw it forward from the ring and let its long teeth taste the ward. It turns with a crisp click, like a remark not meant to be contradicted. The lid opens with restraint, showing its fitted tray, cloth-lined, corners stiffened by starch and habit. The spoons lie back down as if returning to their pillows. You cover them with the square of linen that prevents their pride from tarnishing into sulks. The lid closes, the lock answers, and the key slides back onto its thong. Iron at your waist has made silver behave, as always. Pewter remains on the board, where it can face bread and broth without ceremony. It needs no prison, only the common trust of daily use. The maid glances at you, broom stilled. She has seen you lock silver before, but still she studies. You let her watch. It is not the spoons you are showing her, but the lesson. Some things earn bolts, others are content with benches. Judgment lies not in the metal, but in the keeper's hand. Keys settle again against wool. The pewter glows in candlelight as if relieved to be chosen for evening's meal. The silver sleeps in its chest, convinced it has been flattered. You allow both illusions. The house sighs softly as shutters hold the dark at bay, and you rest your palm on the belt, reminding yourself that locks are not about distrust, but about peace. The hall settles into its evening pace, and with it comes the soft shuffle of benches across the stone floor. A few neighbours have joined, though not for festivity, only for warmth and company. They sit with mugs of ale, their voices low, their movements unhurried. Candles stand at intervals, glowing without much urgency, as if reluctant to compete with the hearth. You take the narrow key, the one that opens the smaller chest, the one that minds the pewter cups not currently in use. It sits at your side, quiet until called, and now it clicks its mild opinion into the lock. The lid lifts with the air of something familiar, a box that has grown accustomed to being asked politely each evening to give up its contents. The pewter shines with its own blunt honesty. No tricks, no brilliance, no delicate sulks like silver. It is simply there, waiting, shaped well enough to hold ale, and to endure careless elbows on the table. You take out 3 cups, set them on the board, and let the firelight dress them in a thin coat of orange. The sound of pewter against wood is not grand, but it is comfortable, like boots dropped by the door. The neighbours nod, not in thanks would make the gesture too formal, but in acknowledgement, as if the cups themselves had walked out to serve. You return to the chest, slide the rest back under the cloth, and close the lid again. The lock answers with a muted tone, resigned but steady. The key retreats to its ring, satisfied that it has seen to its duty without fuss. Your belt grows a little heavier each time you let it fall back into place, as though iron enjoys proving its relevance in every movement. The guests drink, the pewter behaves, and the house continues its long exhale into night. You sit with them, the sound of spoons against broth bowls joining the fire crackle. Nothing is dramatic. Everything is accounted for. Your daughter-in-law arrives as evening arranges itself along the rafters, soft-footed, careful with her hands, face set in that respectful concentration people wear around tasks they suspect are simpler than they are. You motion her to the bench near the table where the light is kind and the floor remembers to be level. The keys rest against your hip with their usual discretion. You still them with a palm, as you might quiet a well-behaved dog that wants to be included. Walk with me, you say, which is the whole lesson disguised as hospitality. You do not begin with a speech. Keys learn nothing from speeches. They learn from doors, and doors learn from hands. The pantry first. You stand her to your left so the light casts no foolish shadow across the keyhole. The broad key comes forward under your thumb as if called by name. You let her watch the angle straight in, no twisting, no testing of patience, and then you turn only as much as the lock requires. Listen, you say, and the latch gives its small assent, a sound like a nod. You do not open. Again. You turn back, then forward, and let the door remain closed. She nods. She has heard the difference between trying and answering. You open it once enough to smell flour and wood and salt that has chosen to behave, then close and lock. Your hand knows the weight. You tell her. Use the key to confirm, not to argue. She repeats the motion. The key obeys her because you are standing next to it. That is part of keeping. Tools perform for steadiness. The linen press next. Long key, you say, giving her time to choose it by touch alone. She hesitates, chooses correctly, and you allow a thin smile that is not yet praise. The lock welcomes gentleness. You let her breathe the lavender and see the folds that must remain folds. Then you shut the doors and hold her hand at the point where the latch settles home. There, you say. She closes her fingers as if she has caught something light. Do not slam, you add. Wood sulks for a week. Along the wall, the chests perform their old trick of looking identical while asking for different keys. You name each without ceremony household. Linens too stout for shelves, small valuables, and the one that enjoys being important. She handles the blunt key, then the narrower, then the stubby, self-satisfied one. Each opens and closes once. Each receives exactly the attention it merits, and no more. You lock what invites fingers, you say, and you leave easy what should be used. She glances toward the pewter on the board and understands without having to ask about silver. At the side door, you teach the latch that looks friendly and is not. You set the door on the catch that admits air and denies ambition, then angle the settle a finger's width so a stranger must turn a shoulder. Welcome is not the same as access, you say. Doors know the difference. Help them remember. She laughs under her breath, which is correct. Locks prefer laughter that minds its manners. You hand her the church key, the slimmer cousin that sits among household teeth as if born to them. One of three, you say, and today not ours to turn. She weighs it with a little reverence that does it no harm. When asked to show it, you continue, you show it. When asked to use it, you ask who else is present. She tucks it back onto the ring with proper humility. Iron detects vanity and misbehaves for it. You pause at the counting corner. No lock, you say, sliding the curtain forward, but a boundary. You place her hand on the cord so she can feel the weight of woven thread that has stood in for iron since before she married your son. Courtesy is stronger than a bolt if the house agrees. She nods, accustomed to measuring strength with eyes. It is new to measure it with cloth. Back to the belt. You unhook the ring and set it in her palms. The weight redraws her expression, a small surprise, followed by consideration. Wear them? She asks, hesitant as if proposing a necklace to a funeral. Not yet, you say, not unkindly. First, know where each lives, then know where each prefers to lie on the ring. Then know the sound each door makes when satisfied. Keys belong at the waist when the waist belongs to the keeping. Quote, you ask her to stand and walk the length of the hall with the ring in her hands, the keys quiet, because you have spaced them properly. Halfway she turns, and the pantry key kisses its neighbor. You stop her, separate the two with a new breadth of thong, and show her how to lay leather flat, so iron thinks twice before gossip. Silence is also a skill, you say. She looks sheepish, then amused, then grateful to be told without blush. The hearth claims a moment. You show her how to rake coals, so heat pushes toward shutter and not toward curtain. How the poker speaks when it is used too roughly. How a trivet becomes a rule for pots that mistake enthusiasm for usefulness. None of this is keys, and all of this is keeping. She watches with the attention of a person who has burned fingers and decided against drama thereafter. In the shed, you show her the mash tun strap, and the wedge at the tap. And though there is nothing to unlock, you let her see the habit of checking. Locks are declarations, you say, but habits are locks you carry in your hands. Back inside, at the cheese shelf, she wrinkles her nose and tries not to be obvious about it. Cheese smells of choosing to last, you say. Curds are not obliged to flatter. She laughs again, this time with less caution. You give her the purse to tie. She produces a neat knot that would impress a ribbon and disappoint a thief. You loosen it and teach the market knot that chooses function over romance. Coins behave for cloth, you say. They run away from prettiness. She ties it again, better. The purse sits quiet. Before dusk thickens, you return to the pantry. This time you open, not just for practice, but for bread one heel for the boy, a modest slice for the evening soup. You let her measure salt into the fold of paper and close the chest herself. The key turns, the latch answers correctly. Good, you say, and spend the word because it buys more than it costs. She stands a little straighter. The house listens, and, finding nothing to criticize, approves by continuing to be itself. At the lane door, you draw the bar to its waiting hooks and set it there without seating, as a rehearsal that has the sense not to be final. You place her hand on the middle of the wood. Lift with calm, you say. Hurry makes bars heavy. She lifts. The bar chooses lightness. You let it rest again. The ring returns to your belt. Her fingers follow it with their eyes, not coveting, only assessing the way a sensible woman looks at a field and measures how many hands it asks for. You will carry them, you say, when the house knows your voice. She nods, unoffended by the truth. Voices take time. Iron is patient with time and impatient with nonsense. You give her a cloth and a drop of oil, and set two little keys in her hand, the needle box and the work box. Polish, you say. No shine, only contentment. She rubs in small circles, then wipes teeth clean. The metal darkens to that quiet sheen that smells faintly of care. Enough, you say, and she stops at enough, which is the best sign of the evening. By the window the sky has learned its night. You lead her once more past pantry, press, chests, hatch, curtain, door. She touches nothing now, only breathes the memory of each latch in her fingers. Tomorrow, you say, you will walk with me again. And after, she asks. You will walk alone, you answer, and the house will not notice the difference. She smiles, a small, serious smile. She believes you, the keys at your waist believe you, and you, being practical, will let proof be quiet when it comes. Dusk finishes its opinion and leaves the hall to candlelight and memory. The storm has rehearsed and gone elsewhere. The hearth keeps a quiet argument with the damp. You lift the horn lamp, touch wick to flame, and watch the light decide to be brave. The keys wait where they always wait, lying against your hip like a reminder you do not need and still appreciate. Night opens the house into longer shapes. Corridors begin to speak in hushes. This is a good hour for iron. You do not light every candle. Houses prefer to dream in patches. The lamp is enough, a moving circle that knows your wrist. You carry it in your left hand so your right can answer doors. The ring warms under your palm when you steady it, and the metal gives a tiny, companionable click that says, yes, we are here. Yes, we remember. You step into the passage and let the floor tell you who has gone this way for years. Boards give small complaints and then think better of it. The rushes hush your tread without pretending to be velvet. Night breeds new geography out of familiar measures. The corner beyond the buttery becomes a bend in a lane. The stair to the solar becomes a hill that only thoughts climb. You pause and listen, not for danger, but for the truth of where you are. The lamp's halo softens the latch ahead. Your belt answers first. A nudge at the hip, the metal's neat weight telling you that the pantry lies to the left, the press to the right, the yard door behind. Memory, yes, but also iron. You read distance by the way the keys settle when you turn. You tilt the lamp and hear the corridor the way keys hear it. Air changes near a door. Wood takes sound differently where bolts sit. Stone returns your step more seriously near the outside wall. You walk as you always walk. with the generosity of someone who is not pretending to be a cat. Still, the belt makes a map. The pantry key gives a duller tap than the long grain key. The square-headed cellar key keeps its counsel unless invited. You have placed them so their small remarks never quarrel. At night, those differences turn into directions. Through the middle passage, the air cools. Stone lives under the plaster there. It keeps its own weather. The smell changes from tallow and wood to something like river kept sensible. You breathe it and think of winter cheeses and a door you will test tomorrow. The lamp peels a little darkness from the buttery hatch. You leave the hatch at friendly closed, catch set and take pleasure in the click. At night, sounds are rounder. A latch that barely spoke at noon now pronounces its lesson. You stop in the doorway of the pantry and listen without opening. Grain has no voice, but rooms do. A tight room hums in damp. A good room leans into the silence like a chair into a wall. This room leans well. You nod at wood no one else can see you nod at. The keys enjoy your formality. At least you choose to think so. Sarcasm keeps widows from treating cupboards as persons, which cupboards would hate. By the turn to the yard door, the floor dips the width of your palm. Your foot remembers, the lamp forgives. The ring gives a single note iron greeting gravity, and then lies still. Outside, the night lays its face against the shutter, and finds you interesting for half a breath. You bar the back door fully now, and feel the bar seat itself like a word at the end of a sentence. The lock does not require turning after that, but the key turns anyway, because respect is cheap and habit cheaper. You walk back the length of the hall, and now the house speaks in a register that belongs only to late hours. A beam ticks as it learns the night's chill. The hearth gives a hollow sigh that means coal has chosen to be red rather than spectacular. Far away, a dog disapproves of some moonlit enterprise. None of this is invitation. The keys keep their opinions local. When you come to a stop, they come to a stop. When you bend, they know to lie flat. You have taught them to be quiet, and they have taught you to listen. Now the corridor by the inner door, the one that misunderstands itself without light and invents corners for sport. You let the lamp lead, but only just. Your right hand drops to the ring. Your thumb finds the blunt chest key. Your forefinger rests on the long press key. You do not mean to use either. You mean to listen with your hand. The metal answers with the smallest recognition, and the space answers with itself. Dry, even, satisfied. A gust visits when you open the wicket to test the lane. It smells of wet leaves and someone else's banking fire. You set the catch, not fully, because you are in attendance. Attendance is its own lock. The keys at your side agree. No one walking past would hear them. You consider that a compliment to the lessons you forced on leather and habit this afternoon. On the way back to the hall, you let the light stray across the pewter. It returns your courtesy by looking thoughtful rather than proud. The silver chest sleeps and wants no audience. You pat the belt with the back of your hand, and the ring answers with the slightest tap. That is the sound of ownership without performance. You prefer it to every speech you have ever not made. At last you stand where the passages meet, and allow yourself one more inventory that uses only ears. Pantry, breath like wood, press, confident by scent alone, buttery, catch assured. Ja, barzettel, lame, wigged, decent, counting corner, curtain composed, hearth, satisfied, keys, present. You lower the lamp wick by a hair so the flame will stop showing off. The house becomes itself again, not a stage, but a nest. You carry the light to the peg by your bed, and leave it there to mind the last stretch of evening. You do not unhook the ring. It will hang on its peg later. For now, it rests on your hip, warm from your walking, calm from its rounds. The corridors settle, the doors remember their shapes, and the keys go from speech to breath to sleep, same as you, same as houses ought. The hearth is a creature that understands bedtime better than people do. It does not argue about schedules, it simply lowers its voice until even the ash begins to whisper. You oblige it with the tools a house respects. The poker rests where a sensible tool rests within reach, out of temper. You lift it and hear the neat rasp of iron on grate, then the soft drift of ash sliding aside. Embers brighten, surprised at their own usefulness. then settle into a red that minds your hand. You draw the coals forward without ceremony. A stubborn knot of half-burnt wood feigns sleep. You nudge and it remembers it is coal now, not ambition. The trivet steps back from the heat. The kettle retreats to a cooler hook. Nothing need prove itself after dusk. Ash smells like a day that behaved. It rises in pale breaths when you stir, then floats down the moment you stop telling it what to do. With the rake you pull a shallow hollow at the back of the hearth, the old nest where warmth keeps secrets until morning. Coals go there as if they invented the place. You level the front with a thin quilt of ash, enough to persuade stray flame to choose rest over performance. A house sleeps better when its fire remembers the difference. The boy leans in the doorway, a posture that says help and hazard in equal parts. You tip your chin toward the sand bucket. He brings it near without flourish. Improvement counts, even if it arrives shyly. Banked, you say, and he nods as though promoted to keeper of embers. Later, he will glance at the hearth 3 times and admit to. You take the small bellows, the polite pair that prefers coaxing to bluster, and give 2 slow breaths to the back of the nest. The red deepens, then agrees to keep counsel. Enough, you say to the fire, to the room, to the boy. Hooks hang quiet. The poker lies flat, so it will not dream of falling. A tidy hearth has fewer ambitions. The chimney ticks like cooling brick learning manners. Keys contribute nothing here, which is their finest help. They rest at your waist with the agreeable heaviness of tools permitted to be off-duty while still getting credit for attendance. Now the back door. The bar waits like a sentence that knows where it ends. You lift it, not like a trumpet, but like bread from an oven's steady hands. No theatre. The wood rises from its hooks with a whisper, then lowers into the opposite set. It seats with that rounded thunk everyone understands without being taught. You set the iron drop into its shoe. It answers with a small, satisfied click. The square-headed key turns because habit likes to bow after the play is finished, even when the bar alone would have kept the door honest. Before you leave the threshold, you test what daylight hides. Night has fingers. You lay your palm to the plank and feel along the jamb for a thin draught, trying its luck. There it is, clever as a mouse. You take the wedge from the shelf and persuade the gap to reconsider. The wood obeys, as wood does for people who are repetitive in the right way. Doors prefer consistency. The lane wicket receives similar attention. Catch to decent, not complete, you are still about. The tiny shutter near the buttery gets its peg moved 1 hole tighter. Storms talk in their sleep, and shutters answer unless given better work. You make the rounds your feet know without your eyes. At every turn your hand travels to the ring, not always to turn a key, but to let the weight tell you what has been chosen and what remains. You pass the pantry and do not open it, because dignity is another kind of lock. The press answers with a faint ribbon of lavender through wood, enough to reassure without boasting. Cheese keeps its animal counsel behind its own bolt. You accept that night prefers honesty to perfume. Along the chest line you try each hasp with a fingertip and listen to lids not moving. That sound, the absence of argument, is the one you like best. You wipe the poker with the ash rag and hang it where its temper improves. You set the guard across the hearth, an iron smile that discourages logs from attempting adventures. The maid covers the bowl on the board with its practiced plain cloth. The boy yawns and stows the bellows. You allow both, because yawns and bellows have equal authority at this hour. At the cross passage, the last drafts try their tricks. You answer with the settle's familiar angle, with a floor scrap persuaded into service as a door's companion, with the measured lift that sets a latch to catch now and complain later. Nothing bangs. Slamming is a young sport and earns splinters. Your keys make a single companionable tap as you turn, amused by your insistence on civility. One more kneel at the hearth. Your knees find the courteous places in the flags by habit. The ash has subsided into something that looks like sleep pretending to be snow. You pull the guard a finger toward you until the line pleases the eye and the floor stops having opinions. Then you sit back and listen for the clicks that compose the final sentence of a sensible day. Bar, catch, wedge, latch, Lock. They arrive one by one, like relatives who understand supper and do not linger in the doorway. The horn lamp goes with you along the passage. Its small circle of light floats ahead, never bright enough to wake a corridor, never dim enough to insult a toe. At your hip the ring settles, warmer now from work it mostly did earlier. When you lift the lamp to the peg by your bed, the keys give one last note. It is not a jingle, it is the quiet acknowledgement of colleagues dismissing one another until tomorrow. You stand for the length of a calm breath, and choose to be satisfied, not the kind of choice that makes stories, only the kind that lets houses sleep, fires behave, and doors wake in good humour when asked. You have raked, you have barred, you have listened until wood and iron admitted they were ready to hold still. The hearth keeps its nest, the bar keeps its promise, the lock keeps its manners, the keys keep company. The night, not being foolish, takes the hint. You kneel as you have always knelt, not because knees enjoy stone, but because stone enjoys honesty. The flag is cool through your gown. You fold your hands the simple way that does not demand admiration from saints or neighbours. A candle waits on the stool, flame modest, wick trimmed to mind its manners. Smoke rises in a line so thin it forgets to be seen. You prefer prayers that share this talent. What do you say? Very little. You are not applying for favour, only returning a day that has asked to be kept and has been. You offer the names of things rather than speeches. Bread, salt, linen, ale, curds, coals. You add the plain coins and the plainer tallies, the boy's neat bundle of sticks, the maid's hinge that did not squeak, the bar that understood a sentence ends. You say these words, as someone might inventory a small ship before a winter river, one pouch of dry food, one good rope, one lamp that behaves. Heaven, which has seen worse ledgers, is unlikely to take offence. The keys touch your side when you shift. The ring lifts and settles as if nodding. It is a familiar weight, the sort you forget until it is absent. You think not for the first time, that iron at the waist is your rosary, the prayer that keeps itself, teeth in their thongs, wards that remember, leather that answers to wax and patience, a litany carried rather than recited. You have learned more theology from locks than from sermons, and the locks do not mind this confession. Memory arrives when called to by quiet. It does not make speeches either. A table where there were 2 bowls, a laugh that did not travel far because the roof kept it. A pair of boots by the door drying their own opinion of rain. You let the pictures stand as tall as they wish, then nod them back toward their proper shelves. You keep these, you think, the way you keep barley measured, covered, turned when needed, never left open for mice. Widowhood, which everyone imagines as a curtain, is more like a timetable. Bells mark hours, habits mark the spaces between. The veil softens edges, the belt stiffens them. Your house does not know sorrow, it knows doors, you prefer it that way. Grief will slip into the round if you let it there in the pause between pantry and press, sometimes in the dusting of lavender, sometimes in the shallow print of your 2 fingers in the flour. You do not bar the door to it, you simply allow it to be a guest and not a steward. You bless nothing aloud, and still blessing occurs. The good manners of hinges after oil, the obedient cool of linen kept from damp, the first sweet runnings from the mash, the cheese rind turning a right sort of stubborn, pewter that refuses to be vain, silver that surrenders to its chest without incident. If such blessings are small, that is because the world is made mostly of smallness, knit together by attention. Your keys, stubborn little needles of iron, do the knitting. You think of the day in iron syllables, morning open to flour and salt, cellar and linen, click, clack, turn, rest. Noon gave broth and a bench that did not complain, a book that accepted short words and honest figures, a quill trimmed to fit your hand rather than a scribe's pride. Afternoon taught brewing its patience, and curds their corner. Evening taught doors their closing, and embers their nest. Night has learned to speak softly again. It will forget tomorrow. You will remind it. A breeze wanders under the door as if it had a right to inspect your prayer. You answer with the settled latch and the angled settle. Boundary without scolding. In the corner, the lamp lowers its voice. The wick makes that contented sound of thread thinking about ash. The house breathes as animals do in winter long, unhurried, satisfied with warmth that does not brag. You are not a pious woman, you tell yourself. You are a practical one. Practicality, to your faint surprise, has made you gentle. You lay one hand on the belt and feel the rings round under the leather. Each key has learned the curve of you. Each thong has learned the path it must not stray from. You could speak their order as a psalm: pantry broad, press long, chest blunt, cellar square, grain shallow, needle thin, church decorous, and still you prefer the way they speak themselves, by weight and the smallest touch of tooth through wool. If anyone asks why you wear them, here is the answer you reserve for no one. Because steadiness chooses its own altar, and yours is a waist that does not forget. You light no extra candle for the dead. Flame breeds conversation among moths. Instead, you give a nod toward the space in the bed you no longer smooth, and let that nod stand. You recall one joke about saints and spoons and allow it an eyebrow. You remember a hand that never pretended to understand doors and, to your credit, taught that hand how latches prefer to be lifted. You give thanks that learning took. You give thanks that locks do not resent beginners. The parish bell is late by whatever measure bells use. One note, then a second, then the rest decide whether to follow. You do not count them. Night prayers belong to people who enjoy arithmetic in the dark. You stand when your knees recommend that you do, and you bow the short bow that keeps blood polite and joints willing. The candle's pool widens for a breath, then returns to itself. When you rise, the belt goes with you. The ring answers your posture. The house registers your decision to be finished with kneeling and changes nothing in response, which is its greatest kindness. You pinch the candle out with wetted fingers and watch the last thread of smoke forget its shape. In the quiet that follows, you hear exactly what a kept house should sound like. The faint settle of wood, the polite rest of iron, the even hush of wool along rushes as you turn. There is no revelation, there is only readiness. You lay your palm briefly on the table, as you did at noon, and the wood returns your warmth. You touch the bar in the back door, and it returns its certainty. You brush the ring, and it returns that sober promise. Tomorrow we will open, we will close, we will keep. It is enough. You prefer enough to astonishment. You cross the room to the peg that waits beside the bed, and think, not of sleep first, but of how sleep prefers a house that locks itself kindly around its keeper. Keys have taught you kindness in metal: never slam, never scrape, turn only till agreed, and kindness has made the house patient with your steps. You extinguish the lamp and let the darkness choose its furniture. Prayer, you decide, is simply this: to name the things you answer for and then to sleep near them without fear. The belt comes last. You unbuckle it with the care that daylight never sees, for daylight believes in haste and errands. At night, the leather deserves its own ceremony. The ring of keys slides forward, a little chorus of teeth tapping against one another. They look smaller when you hold them in your palm, though the weight tells you otherwise. You place the whole ring on the chest at the foot of your bed, not inside, not hidden, just resting on the wood where your eyes can find it, if sleep should wake too suddenly. It is not distrust that keeps them close, it is familiarity. Keys belong to reach, just as bread belongs to table and linen to shelf. The room accepts darkness as you loosen the veil, fold it once, and lay it where morning will remember. The wool beneath your shoulders scratches just enough to remind you of its honesty. The rushes give a faint sigh as your body lowers into them. Embers in the hearth blink one last time and then decide on sleep themselves. You stretch one hand, touch the chest, and feel the ring's roundness through the wood. That circle is your signature on the day. All doors kept, all boxes answered, all measures taken. Locks have held, not against the world, but in service to it. Even grief, that most unruly of visitors, has been given its corner without disturbing the house. Night does not praise you. Night does not scold. It only closes its fist gently around the rooms you have set in order. You close your eyes in the same manner. Sleep comes like a key turned the proper way, without scrape, without protest. Only the soft click of agreement. And with that, the house and its keeper are at rest, each having locked the other into peace. The keys are quiet now. They no longer jingle at your side, no longer answer the tug of a latch or the scrape of a chest. They lie still, waiting for another dawn, while the house itself curls into its own deep rest. The air is softer in darkness, a hush carried across beams and walls. You feel the weight of wool upon you, steady and unhurried. The room holds only faint outlines. The chest, the hearth, the bed's edge. Each shape is familiar, worn into place by years of repetition. Nothing startles, nothing intrudes. It is simply there, as it was yesterday, and as it will be tomorrow. Your breathing joins the rhythm of the night. It matches the distant tick of unseen drips in the eaves, the creak of timber that settles like an old companion, the occasional sigh of the embers as they surrender their last glow. The belt and its iron tokens are nearby, but no burden now, merely companions resting as you do. Sleep gathers slowly, as if walking across the fields, carrying no urgency, only patience. It does not need to be welcomed, it arrives regardless, folding you into its pale blanket. In that stillness, the keys remain symbolic not of work, but of closure. Each lock secure, each door at peace. There is nothing to be guarded, nothing unsettled, only the long, gentle drift of a house breathing quietly through the night. And you, like the iron ring you set aside, are at ease, still, steady, uncomplicated. We hope this glimpse into old customs has been a calm and pleasant one. If it made you curious for more, you can like, share, or leave a kind comment. And if you wish, subscribe to be here for the next unhurried tradition we explore together. End of script. Sweet dreams.